This week, we welcome David Asraf. He's the C++ developer, or a C++ developer, I should say, at Vicarius, and Roy Cohen, the co-founder and VP of sales at Vicarius, to discuss the patchless horseman. That's right, patching without patching. In our second segment, we welcome back Sumedh Thakar, President and Chief Product Officer at Qualys, to talk about building security into the DevOps lifecycle. In the security news, Cisco patches a critical vulnerability in Jabber for Windows. I'm calling this one a cross-site scripting remote code execution. Stay tuned for that. Expert found multiple issues in MoFi routers. Team TNT gains full remote takeover of cloud instances using an off-the-shelf management tool. A Bluetooth bug opens devices to man-in-the-middle attacks, and a former NSA chief, General Keith Alexander, is now on Amazon's board. And the legality of security and research is being decided in the U.S. Supreme Court. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Hackers attack systems that are not patched. You need protection, but virtual patching isn't working. That's why you go patchless. Topia analyzes, prioritizes, and remediates vulnerabilities before they're exploited. Even the 0 days, all from one interface. Security gets better memory defense to complement endpoint strategy while improving overall vulnerability management and compliance. Adopt a hacker's mindset, eliminate vulnerability. Get your 30-day free trial at securityweekly.com/Vicarius. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Elastic Security empowers security teams everywhere to prevent, detect, and respond to threats quickly through a unified solution. And it's free and open, putting you in control. Use Elastic Security to eliminate blind spots by analyzing all of your data, no matter its volume, format, or age. Stop threats at scale with automated threat and anomaly detection. And arm every analyst with fast search and integrated case management. Download or try Elastic SIM for free and experience the benefits of an open security solution backed by world-class security research at securityweekly.com/elastic.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who likes his sexual partners like he likes his coffee. Big and cold. Mr. Possidori.
Welcome, everyone. It's episode number 666, believe it or not. I guess this is going to be one hell of an episode. I guess.
Nice.
I'm just full of the dad jokes. It is being recorded on September 10th, 2020, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, where we welcome Mr. Larry Pesce.
In studio for the first time in a long time.
It's good to see you, my friend.
It's like 7 months,
right?
7 months, something like that. Yeah, it's been interesting. It's good to be back for
at
least anyway.
Nice to have you back.
Yep, we're gonna take it week by week, and
yeah, it's good stuff. On the lines remotely, Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad I made it.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us as well. Jeff, welcome.
What you should have said, Paul, is this will be a beastly episode.
Right.
And Larry, I'm extremely jealous that you're in studio.
Yeah,
Yes.
I was commenting earlier that it's like the first time I've actually interacted with humans in months, so it's been interesting. Aside from my family, that is.
Right.
Nice.
We're waiting on Joff. I think he's
Later?
joining at 7. Okay. There's no other hosts on there that I can't see, right?
Tyler?
Yeah, I got Tyler and
Oh,
Jeff.
you did?
Okay.
You got Tyler.
Excellent. Let's see. Quick announcement. Join the Security Weekly mailing list. and our Discord channel, and subscribe to all of our shows by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe. Click the join button to join that list, and visit securityweekly.com/guests. If you've got a suggestion for the show, for a topic or guest, you can use the form at securityweekly.com/guests, and we will review those and hopefully get people on the show that you requested. David Asraf is a graduate of an elite technology unit in the Israeli army and holds a BSc in computer science. He has worked in various security roles and was a lead developer at Checkpoint and is currently a C++ developer at Vicarius, leading multiple research projects. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, Paul. Nice to be here.
Yes, nice to have you, David. Roy Cohen is, of course, a cybersecurity expert with over 15 years of experience. It's not his first time on the show. He's been on a few times. So, Roy, it's nice to have you back.
Likewise. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
And for those that want to learn more about Vicarius, visit securityweekly.com/Vicarius, especially if you're tuning into this segment and you really hate applying patches, because none of us have ever been burned by applying a patch that caused something bad to happen, right? No, everything just goes swimmingly.
Absolutely, every time.
Every time. And patches are available for everything all the time, right?
Yeah.
And no one tells you that they can't apply a patch. Every time you go to your sysadmin teams and developers, they're like, oh, yes, absolutely. We love applying patches.
Yeah, no, reboots, no problem.
No problem. Of course, it never, ever works out that way, which is why I am so excited about this segment. So, Roy, David, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think you kind of brought into the spotlight kind of the main challenge we're having here. Patches are kind of a mess. It comes every other day. There are so many vulnerabilities, like we said in the former session. It's chaotic. There are so many of them. Patching windows are not sufficient. It becomes more and more complex. And there is a need in the market, a growing need we see, also like frustration we're getting from clients, that even automation of patches is not necessarily going to solve all of their challenges. We see always advancement on how you deploy patches and how you evaluate them, but there is a new category which is being evolved, which is kind of how you can secure an application without actually applying a patch. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and now, Roy, and I think the other benefit there, having worked for a vulnerability management company, I saw all the different use cases where they'd come back to me with questions about scan results and go, well, I patched that. Why is it still showing that it's vulnerable? And they're like, it must be lying. I'm like, no, it's not lying. It's telling the truth, because there's like a whole host of other situations, right? Like the system didn't reboot, or there's two different versions of the software, or the patch just didn't apply for whatever reason. And in your management software, it told you that it did apply, but it really didn't. And I mean, like, I could go on. Those are the three most popular, right? And it goes back to your point, Roy, of automating patches is great, but are we really patching 100% of the things all the time? I mean, most aren't even trying to apply patches to 100% of the things all the time, right? And then there's the times where there's a variance, right? Where things happen and it doesn't get patched. So, I mean, the challenges with applying patches, we've covered at length on these shows, and it's still a struggle for people today, which is, again, why I'm excited to have you both on the show, to talk about some very unique methods of applying those protections without having to apply the patch right away, or maybe not at all.
So, that's precise. There, just a quick story I had with one of our clients. So we actually deployed the system there. It's a funny story where you said you had the battles with the IT saying, no, this patch this vulnerability doesn't exist. So we had a client where he had, so it's kind of, he gave up. He used a scanner which said he has like around 1 million vulnerabilities. Not exaggerating, it's the true number, or really close to 1 million vulnerabilities, open issues. And he said, look, I'm not going to handle this. I'm probably going to be get a new position in a few months. I'm not going to handle that. So he's kind of left it aside. And the new IT guy said, this is the former guy's problem. I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to patch that. This is quite a challenge. So what we wanted to discuss for today was to do, again, another evaluation of an exploit we mentioned before, and to discuss about new techniques and new countermeasures we have to stop threats in runtime without these kind of very aggressive changes. Eventually a patch, it's a process where you kind of stop the process. Sometimes you need to have a downtime to replace some DLLs and modules which are loaded to the memory. So we are always looking for new ways to do so. And this is what David will be showing us in the next few minutes. So
yeah, and Roy, there's another interesting scenario because when you described this to me, you said we don't have to make any changes to any of the binaries to apply these patches. And there are solutions out there that we've seen where, maybe the vendor is delaying the patch or won't patch an issue. And then there's another company or even an open source project that goes, well, we patch the binary for you or can give you a way to patch that binary and plug that hole. It's not supported by the vendor. And sometimes you're painted in a corner and you're like, well, should I do that, right? And I've never been a huge fan of unsupported, third-party patching like that typically requires you modify the binary. So another reason why I like the in-memory protections that you're going to discuss tonight.
Exactly that. Imagine that eventually for in-memory protection, it's also very easy to, assuming you want to revert, because everything is being done on memory, there's no let's call it a hard-coded change. It's very easy to revert back to the first position and then, go to the old, let's call it obsolete way of working. Mm-hmm. So this is another advantage of in-memory protection, the fact that you can go in and without the very easy swift maneuvers, as we're going to also show through this session.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I think without further ado, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit, just to remind everybody what we discussed in the last session. We spoke about format string vulnerabilities, a little bit about format string, just to be on the same page, everybody. So there is a feature in some basic function that many people use in C and C++, like printf, scanf, all of these family of functions. This feature is format string. Actually, you can have input string with placeholders. These placeholders, you can recognize them by the percentage and then some kind of indication of the type. And into these placeholders, you can put parameters or locations from the memory. A format string vulnerability is when an attacker can control the format string itself, because when an attacker can change that string, he can get access to memory locations that he's not supposed to get access to, and it can both read and write from restricted locations in the memory. So we don't want the attacker to control our format strings. We're going to discuss again the AnyDesk vulnerability. It's CVE 2020-13160. In this vulnerability, there is a simple process. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the attack, and then I'm going to show it, and also going to show a protection, in-memory protection against this vulnerability. Okay, so if there are any questions, I'll take them now. If no, I'll just dive into it.
Go for it.
Okay, cool. So in this exploit, a simple UDP packet is being sent in the AnyDesk discovery protocol. Basically, when few AnyDesk computers with AnyDesk installed in the same network, they recognize each other and give you the option to connect to another AnyDesk computer. This is some kind of broadcasting discovery protocol. When an attacker sends a crafted UDP into this server listening for discovery broadcasting packets, it can trigger a specific issue if it uses non-UTF encoded characters inside the packet, where the AnyDesk expects to be hostname or username in a UTF-8 format. If it's non-UTF-8 format, the vulnerability is triggered, and the attacker can control the the input that goes into VSN printf, which is one of the functions that we discussed before that has this format feature. When it does that, it can change the global offset table. We're going to get into the global offset table in details in the demonstration. And from then on, it's easy to get remote code execution on the machine. We're going to show that right now. Okay, so let me share my screen and we'll just see it. Okay, can you see my screen all right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Affirmative.
So I'm going to show you the exploit itself, and we're going to open sniffer, Wireshark sniffer, to see the traffic on the 50,001 port, the discovery port. So let's open Wireshark in the background. Okay, and I also made a filter so we don't see all the other traffic. Just want to see this specific port. And okay, we can start running the exploit. We have this AnyDesk GUI, and this is the process that we're going to attack. And let's start. We're gonna open the Metasploit console, and it's an easy tool to show exploit in Kali Linux. Just gonna load for 1 minute. Okay. And I'm choosing the exploit. As we said, it's the specific CV 13160 in 2020. And I'm choosing some options that regarding to the version of Ubuntu that I'm going to attack. And let's check what is my IP. And we also set in that. Okay, so now we are going to activate the exploit. And just a second. Okay, so let's open a shell, and we can actually run commands inside the attacked computer.
Yay, hooray for Shell. I get excited no matter how many times I see it. I get excited.
Yeah, that was easy, right? Really straightforward. Let's take a look on the Wireshark. Oh yeah, so we see here a little bit of traffic on the port that I said before, the 50,001 port. And we can't really analyze the packets here, but we can see some clues for the exploit. If we look, we see the percentage in a few points, and it's actually an indication to the format string vulnerability. Percentage 1, it's been used within the vulnerability. In this area, there is the shellcode itself. We can't really analyze the sensor code here, but still cool to see it. Okay, so now I'm going to show the same exploit, but I'm going to stop in the middle of it and show the specific things that the attacker does in the process, in the memory. Let's just restart everything and get our environment back to the beginning. I'm going to kill all the AnyDesk processes and restart the services. As you can see, I lost the connection because I killed the process. Oh. Okay. Reset it. And let's reopen the AnyDesk GUI because we need to attack it again. Okay. So I'm going to check which process ID is the process ID for the AnyDesk. And it's a little bit too big for us to see. Okay, this is the process that we are going to attack here. And I'm going to use a cool tool named Frida Trace. It's part of the Frida project. If you heard about it, it's a cool library with many options, help security researchers, help people who like to mess around with the memory of an application. You should try it out. I'm going to, okay, I'm not going to kill Frida. I'm going to, just a second. Okay. Let's use Frida to attach to this function. As we discussed before, the VSM printf is the function that's being exploited here. With the trace that I just set up, we're going to see every time that the function is being called, we're going to see the input that the function gets. We're expecting here something else a little bit, not the usual input. We are looking for UTF-8, non-UTF-8 characters, which will trigger errors in the display. We'll see that later. And we're also going to open GDB to the same process. Okay. Now, we discussed before the global offset table. We just mentioned it. Let's take a look at the global offset table. The global offset table is actually a mechanism that helps binary to use functions that are not located within the binary. Every time that I'm using a function that is in an external library, shared object library in Linux mainly, I'm going to use the global offset table to point to the specific location in the memory that the function resides in. When the application needs a specific function, in this case X3GC, for example, it asks from the operation system. It asks us where exactly this function is located, and the answer that the operation system gives back is going to be stored in this location in the global offset table. The next time that I'm going to need the same function, I'm just going to the global offset table and taking the value from there. If we're going to look at the global offset table and break the time function, we're going to see that the location in the memory is this location, and this is the entry for the time function. I'm going to add a watch point for the time function, and continue the run here. The reason that I added the watch point here in the time function is because the attacker in this specific exploit is changing the global offset table and changing the time entry to point to the shellcode that he entered before. The reason why it's doing it specifically to the time function is because the researcher who found this vulnerability just analyzed the binary and found that the next function that's being called after the VSM printf, the problematic one, is the time function. So if we're checking, if we're running the exploit now, we're supposed to stop exactly at the point of change. So let's rerun the exploit and take a look at the thing that we found. Okay, a little bit messy. Let's look at the Frida before we go to the global offset table. We see here these errors, and we see here a normal input. This is the input for the function, and this is the valid input. But here we just get an error. The reason that we see this error is because this function cannot print this non-UTF-8 characters to our screen. It's a small indication that there is something fishy going on here.
Yeah,
So,
you're bringing me back to my struggles converting from Python 2 to 3 and getting all kinds of encoding and decoding errors, which is the error that's coming up here.
Usually when we see that, we're not very happy, but in this case, it's actually something good that we're seeing these errors. It means the exploit actually is working and
Right.
we are on the trail. And let's go to the GDB. By the way, the reason that my GDB looks a little bit different is because I'm using a tool named Jeff on the GDB. It's a really cool tool that will let you have better visibility on a few things, and I really like it. The global offset tables that we showed before, it's a Jeff capability, and so really cool. As we said before, we had the watch point on this location, and as you can see, there was a change in the global offset table. And also we can see the invalid UTF encoded text in name, exactly the thing that we spoke about. This is trying to, here the AnyDesk is trying to print this message into the log, but actually it's triggering the attack. Let's see if we can see the global offset table now and see the change. As you can see, it's no longer pointing to a memory location like this, like another libc function, the same area. It's pointing to a closer location, actually in our stack. The exploit actually failed now because we stopped it for so long and it messed with the timeout over there. But we saw everything, and I think we're ready to see some protection now. So let's reset the environment again. Okay, I'm going to again kill all the processes of AnyDesk, and I'm going to restart the AnyDesk service and reopen the GUI. At this point, I will ask Roy to enable the protection from the agent, from the Topia agent.
Yeah, so of course I will show it afterwards, but basically what I'm doing now is choosing the AnyDesk application over the dashboard, as we're going to see in a few minutes. Applying protection policy for David's machine. We see here Ubuntu AnyDesk. And then what happens is basically that a command is being sent from the server side to the client side to define, okay, this is the policy and these are the binaries you need to protect in memory. As we said, it is in-memory protection. And whenever we see the pieces of vulnerable code that we found in the pre-processing stage, then we're going to security in runtime. So it takes a few seconds to get approved. And I think that we're ready to go, David.
Okay, so let's try to run the exploit again. This time we don't have any watch points or anything to stop it, just the protection. Let's wait for it.
Oh, you spoiled all the attackers' fun.
That's our job. And exactly, exploit complete, but no session, no shell, nothing to be done here. Okay, so this was the demonstration. I will stop the share now, and let's talk a little bit about this attack, about the similar attacks. I'm really trying to ask more of a theoretical question. What can be done in this kind of situations? Do you have any suggestions?
I mean, aren't there already operating system protections, I would think, that protect the global offset table from being manipulated in that way, or that doesn't. That's not a operating system level thing.
Yeah, exactly. There are options that can stop this kind of modification to the global offset table. I want to. Okay, so let's just talk about it. If the AnyDesk vendor for this version, I believe in later versions they fixed that. That's version 5.5.2. If during compilation they would have enabled the railroad option, it changes the whole way that the global offset table is being populated. Instead of every time that we need something, we are asking for it and then receiving the memory location for the function. At the beginning of the application, we're asking for everything that we need.
Yeah.
We get all the locations in the memory, and from that moment on, we are locking the global offset table for changes.
And that's a GCC compiler option. Which one is that, David?
It's the railroad option. You can enable it in most compilers and just avoid these changes to the global offset table, or more accurately, make it so much harder to change.
Right. Yeah, make it less dynamic.
Yeah. So the vendor actually can do. I feel like I should say that the one thing that the vendor can do, other than use all the security options during the compilation, is talk about this. And I feel like sometimes the new developer needs to be educated to understand the vulnerabilities and how they work. And for example, explain about Cohen attacks and how they work, giving some examples could change a lot of things. This simple option, the railroad, is something that every developer that would hear about it once will want to use it in every future application. So education, I think, is something that every vendor should give to his developers. Secure education.
Also, David, along those lines, in that code base, having a function that either tests or encodes or decodes the data into a format that you expect before you then go write it off to the logs with sprintf or similar function, right?
Exactly. And never get outside input into your format string,
right?
No matter if you trust the source or not.
Yes, agreed.
Exactly.
Because there'll always be that time when that source can't be trusted.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that the vendor already released the application and we want to defend it in the customer site. Another thing we can do, the first thing we can do is to defend the network of the customer. We can install firewalls, IPS solution, DPI solution. Basically trying to look at the incoming traffic and classify the traffic, and looking for patterns in the incoming packets. Exploit patterns is something that Deep Packet Inspection, DPI, is trying to do. All these network components are really important, but I think that it will help to prevent many attacks. But this kind of attack that is using unique protocol to AnyDesk is not something that a security vendor, unless he spent time and researched the AnyDesk protocol, reverse engineered it, and understood what kind of input is valid and what kind of input isn't, a network solution most probably wouldn't work in that case. But it's still important to put that.
Are there protections? Are there protections in other operating systems, such as like Windows, where they're using like ASLR, or they're using some like bottom-up memory verification, or even like compiling the compiler hardening flags, where if it gets overwritten, it just doesn't run, and that overflow doesn't do anything in the app. Like, does the operating system matter as far as how this protection can be addressed?
Most modern operation systems have all these features that you just mentioned, ASLR and NXT and stuff like that. But the problem is that not always these options are on. And if you don't enable ASLR in your operation system, it doesn't matter if it supports it or not. So
does the like x86 to 64-bit architecture, does any of that play into additional functions or features or security options for kind of where you guys are going?
In our product, actually, some of it doesn't really matter the architecture. I'm going to get a little bit into our technology real soon, actually.
Yeah, but I think too, what you're saying is that if you're going to use the type of protection that is either in a compile time or either baked into the operating system, you have to rely on two things. You have to rely that the creator of the software enabled those flags in all the versions, that you're running or will be running, that at compile time enabled these extra security options, which may not always be the case. And two, you have to rely on an operating system feature that it's enabled, hasn't been disabled in some capacity, right? So you're relying on really two external components to make sure someone can't exploit a vulnerability on your system, which is a little risky.
So what, Paul? It's actually pretty easy to check a binary that you get and see if all the compilation options were compiled into it. Mm-hmm. And as a customer, I think you can demand that things like this would be done to the software. It's nothing really hard for the vendor to do. Right. And I think that the more people would be aware of these options, the more easy it will be to put pressure on the vendors and just change that. Not releasing the software without simple compilation option is, I think, something that should be done and should be the only way that the vendor releases anything.
Right. I mean, and we all run open source software, right? And then it's up to the people who run the open source project to make sure that's there. And then they're going to release a build where they had to take that out because it caused some kind of problem, right? And now you're exposed to that vulnerability.
And that's even if you don't have an easy way to get around a lot of those protections, right? Like you can bypass ASLR, you can bypass the memory locations, you can find pointer leaks that are available. So
we have a story this week, actually.
Still do it.
We have a research paper that's using Spectre-like vulnerabilities to bypass ASLR. So.
ASLR is not perfect. That's true. But if you are using ASLR in your system, you're not the best of targets for an attacker. If you're trying to attack someone randomly, try to make yourself as protected as possible. Mm-hmm. That's my way of thinking. And other than that, there are a lot more options that can be done in the operation system level. But you're actually taking me to the next point, what we call in-memory protection or patch injection. So if there's a vulnerability, non-vulnerability, we can create a patch in the traditional way and release new binaries and do that. And we can do the same thing with in-memory patching. We can create a patch. We can inject the patch into the vulnerable section. It also takes time to develop this kind of patch, but the deployment of this kind of patches is a lot easier.
So are you injecting the patch into the running process in memory, or are you just monitoring that running process and then stopping when this particular exploit happens?
In our case, in the protection you just saw, it was an injection of protection, into the memory of the AnyDesk process, and the application kept on going as if nothing really happened. It just wasn't vulnerable anymore to that specific exploit.
And so, are you? How does that work without giving away like the secret sauce, like at a high level?
Okay, so in our case, it's something. It's more of a pet generation. So, for example, we discussed in the last session. We talked about algorithms. I wasn't there, but you talked about algorithms that are being used in our products to find specific patterns that point to possible vulnerabilities. If you take the same algorithms that can detect possible vulnerabilities, you can create similar algorithms that patch these points. So our software actually looking for with all kind of pattern recognition and binary analysis, looking for possible vulnerabilities. We take analysis of one vulnerability and try to apply it to other products. And when we have the solution for a specific pattern, we can insert this pattern, inject this patch into different kind of application that meet the same pattern.
So your protections are also a little more universal, right? Like, is this protection specific to AnyDesk, or if other similar Linux software basically has a similar or the same kind of bug, you could conceivably apply that same protection?
Exactly. If we see the same kind of pattern, we can put the same protection in the location of the different vulnerability. The rule that protects against the vulnerability is not unique to AnyDesk in any way.
Gotcha.
Just see a specific pattern and fix it. Another thing that really I really want to mention is that sometimes a vendor releases a patch to a software, and attackers analyzes this patch that was released, and they just see, okay, so something like, for example, our format string was detected in this AnyDesk. So let's try and find other places in the same software that are vulnerable in the same way. So sometimes when a vendor releases a patch, actually you can see that after a few days there is another patch and another patch to a different product of the same vendor or sometimes even in the same product, because it's easier to look for those vulnerabilities now.
Well, yeah, and David, I mean, that makes sense, because if a developer didn't know about that they were introducing a format string vulnerability, in other points in the code when they write to the logs, they're going to have the same vulnerability, but the researcher just found this one instance of it. The vendors that are more diligent will go through their whole code base and go, all right, where else could we possibly have this vulnerability, and patch all instances. But oftentimes, sometimes that doesn't happen, I should say. I think vendors are better about that today than they were years ago, but...
Yeah, so in our case, even if they don't do that, and we see the same pattern in different areas in the same product or other product of the same vendor, we can just apply the same patch.
Right, it's awesome. In that sense, it's a much better patch, quite honestly, because you're not as reliant on all these other factors, right? You're not as reliant on did they fix it in all the areas of the code? Did they compile this version with the appropriate protections? Did my sysadmin and IT team or my DevOps team enable the security protections in Linux that maybe could prevent against this? Maybe on some systems that's disabled, other systems it's enabled, right? In all those other scenarios, you're kind of relying on other third parties to apply security for you. in your model where you're like, well, if we see this type of vulnerability, we can protect it. I like that option a lot better because I'm not relying on other people to make the right decision.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. I think I'm gonna hand over the mic to Roy. You wanna continue from here?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think you did an excellent job here. Just wanted to keep on the following thread of mindset. So yeah, we discussed about the fact that vendors release patches and then researchers go investigate that, look like, you do a bin diff, you search for the locations which are changed, and then you're going to search for other places in the code or other products that in potential may be compromised. But our vision here is kind of something even a bit bigger than just fixing a given application or a given set of products. We're trying to identify a weakness, a weak spot in one vendor and, try to heal the community. So we had some issues or some vulnerabilities that we found in, not mentioning names, but a database application. And we saw that one vendor probably got a bigger team of developers and they were able to cope with vulnerabilities far faster than the others. But the vulnerabilities, the conceptual vulnerabilities also resided under database engines. So we were able to project, first of all, the vulnerability pattern detection to other applications, and then also the protection mechanism to other applications, which is kind of what we try to envision here. And we always try to increase the families that we are covering. This is kind of where we're aiming.
Roy, how many different types of vulnerabilities or exploitation techniques do you think you can cover today? I don't know if there's like a hard and fast number or like roughly what are we talking about in terms of numbers of different types of vulnerabilities or exploit paths?
Yeah, well, we cover a various number of families. I don't remember the exact number. For example, the one that we saw here, it's CW676, which is potentially dangerous functions. And we're also going to see this in the dashboard. So we got all these families that are increasing. We got a team of researchers that works 24/7 to add new categories. It's not an easy task, of course, to try to generalize both the detection. And then when we have a detection, we try to also to connect a protection mechanism to do a match. Sometimes it's not that trivial, obviously. This is why sometimes it takes some families do require a bit more specific, let's call it the protection mechanism. As the one we had here, the AnyDesk was a bit more specific to others because of various reasons. But we try always to build a general rule rather than going a CV by CV basis because this is not scalable.
Right. From an end user perspective, when I want to go protect a system or group of systems from a particular exploit, am I naming it by application or am I saying like protect this from format string, injection encoding issues or whatever, right? As a user, I'm selecting the application that I want to protect from what I've seen in the interface, correct?
Yeah, so maybe it's a good time to just show that. So I'll be sharing my screen here. As we can see, this is the main dashboard. Basically, when David tried to trigger the exploit and we applied the protection, so what I did as a user, so to speak, I just went and searched for AnyDesk, as you can see here. So I searched for AnyDesk, and as you can see, one of the machines is protected, the Ubuntu AnyDesk machine. Okay, so that's the one which we triggered. And by going to the operationals log, we can see that the AnyDesk was protected. And if we'll go to the, let's see here, let me just reload that. Yeah, okay, there's some loading issue. So if we see here that we saw the AnyDesk tag here. So we got the AnyDesk process and the further process name. We see the attempt, we see the family. In that case, it's a known family. And we see the type of the attack, malicious input. So this is what the user would see. By the way, if there is, so to speak, a false positive, he can allow it. He can whitelist this process. But the goal here is to know, to first to notify on an exploit and then to block it without further ado. So when you getting back to the protection side of things, as you saw, Paul, you don't need to really go family by family. Basically, when you apply the protection, we are covering all the supported families all together. So I think it's a bit easier way. This is why, again, sometimes it takes us a bit longer to embrace new families of protection because we do the extensive checks. But this is has a very good trade-off in the sense of user experience, because you don't need to go vulnerability by vulnerability, and sometimes when you try to apply, let's call it an alternative protection mechanism per vulnerability, it's kind of an equivalent for an actual patch. You do the testing, you do the evaluation. So when you have it as a whole, this is something we see very valuable. By the way, you can also see the vulnerability here that David has mentioned. And as we saw in the previous session, we also found the threats on the binary level, at least some of them and a few more. So
yeah, actually, for the specific vulnerability we talked about in this segment, the researcher who discovered it put together a very lengthy post, which is really awesome. Yeah, so if you're listening to this and you want like more information, like all the nitty-gritty details, it is detailed out there, and it's linked to like right from the CVE entry. So
yeah.
My other question was like, if I have let's say a class of systems that I'm using to host my applications, can I just like tell Topia to like just go protect all the software on all those systems? Right, like how generalized or granular can I be with these protections?
So I think this is also one of the topics we're going to discuss in the following session. How you define on what to protect, because as we know, eventually, I don't think all of the users or all of the sysadmins will go and enable everything altogether. Probably they will be a bit more cautious and they try to identify which of the applications they need to focus at. And this is kind of also the third component of the system to help you to identify which of the threats that you have are the most critical ones and why. So this is kind of the third part of this loop, where how you can prioritize the most critical threats. Okay, we have the mechanism, whether by patching if available or this patches protection mechanism, but how we know what we should do next? Because again, we cannot cope with everything. There will always be new vulnerabilities. Probably if we can find 0 days, there will be significantly, exponentially more than ones which are public, at least, vulnerable spots on the binary level. So we need to focus here. So one of the key components of the system is the one that checks for each and every characteristic of the running application and the properties of the vulnerability, both the known and the unknown vulnerabilities, how we can abuse them. And if it meets a certain threshold, then it makes sense to do something about. And of course, we're going to elaborate a bit about that, how you prioritize risk in companies, and then what you can do about it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a much better approach than just telling it to protect everything.
Yeah, you should go and patch everything,
Yeah.
Also.
No, that's really cool. More questions?
None for me. It's pretty damn cool stuff.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I want that. I need that. I need that in my life.
You need that in your computer, actually.
Yes, very much so. Supported platforms, Roy.
So we support Windows 7 and above. Of course, Windows 7 is correlated to 2008 server. As for Linux, we support CentOS, Red Hat. Now we're extending that. Hopefully Mac by the end of the month. These are the things that we're now covering.
Awesome. Yeah, so you folks are very busy.
Excellent. You scared me for a minute there when you said you support Windows 7, and I'm like, oh, please, God, please say later. Please say more than Windows 7.
Yeah, Windows 7 and later, yes.
I still got, actually, last week I had a question about Windows NT. And I was like, I think we cannot help you there. I'm not sure anyone can. I think you should do something else. So, yeah, we do not support NT.
But Windows 7 is officially end of life?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, as of January.
Right. So I think
there's the extended package or something,
that
right?
You can buy, probably, right? Yeah. But that's awesome. You have support on that too, as people are still obviously trying to move off of that. So having this level of protection on something that Microsoft's not issuing patches for is a huge win. I often get that question from enterprises as well. I've never gotten and haven't recently gotten NT as a supported support for that. I get XP, like, we still have some Windows XP, like what's available for that, right? But that was a few years ago.
It's called Windows 10. That's
exactly. But having support for Windows 7, I think, is great, because there are many enterprises that still have the older operating systems that have no support available for them unless you want to pay for it. So
that reminds
I'd rather have Vicarius.
It does beg the question, though, from a Windows 7 and support perspective. If Microsoft is not creating patches, not specifically looking for vulnerabilities in that operating system, who is? What exactly are you supporting on that operating system if nobody's researching for vulnerabilities?
It's a great question. I will just do a brief about the former session. So the fact that we can identify vulnerabilities, first of all, it's being generated automatically. Once we categorize a family or pattern, so to speak, then we try to project it to binaries, other binaries that may contain that specific threat within. So the fact that it's a Windows 7 doesn't really, it's more related to the protection mechanism and why there are some limitations that we cannot run on older operating system, mainly because of the kernel kind of features. But as for the detection and the protection, it's the same concept, it's the same workflow. Eventually you have an MZ file if it's a Windows machine, it's a compiled binary, or an ELF if it's a Linux, and you have the same, let's call it technique, or the set of techniques that you go and hunt for the vulnerabilities. So the fact that Microsoft, or for that matter, no other vendor supports a given application doesn't affect the way that if we have this pattern, we have this technique to identify the set of families, even if it's obsolete and out of support, we can still find threats and also take care of that. So we don't need to have new exploits and new vulnerabilities disclosed for us to be able to identify threats within the binary, on the binary level.
Which
fair enough.
Like that's kind of interesting though, because if you are monitoring a Windows 7 system, right, that it isn't getting active patches, you put your protections on there, and you see exploits that maybe the rest of us haven't seen, that means you've got a nice little collection of 0 days that potentially you're sitting on, or the customer would discover, right? You don't have to answer. You don't have to answer that. By the way, that's really awesome. Very cool stuff. For our listeners that would like to learn more and get a demo and or trial, you can visit securityweekly.com/Vicarius. Roy and David, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly and staying up really late to do the show live with us. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll take a short break. Come back with our next interview with Sumedh from Qualys. Stay tuned.
Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. The average large enterprise has 24 million vulnerabilities. The good news is only 5% will probably be exploited. But which 5%? That's where Kenna comes in. Kenna Security's modern vulnerability management technology combines real-time threat intelligence, data science, and automated risk analysis to prioritize the vulnerabilities that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Team up with Kenna Security and make the most of your limited resources. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Kenna Security. The biggest problem in security that remains unsolved is flat networks inside the cloud and data center that allow threats to move laterally and compromise vulnerable targets. But microsegmentation using traditional firewalls is too complex and time-consuming. There's a better approach: Edgewise Zero Trust Auto Segmentation. Edgewise is impossibly simple microsegmentation. Using the identity of machines and software that are communicating, Edgewise offers the strongest protection that adapts automatically to changes. Protect any application in any cloud without any changes to your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Edgewise.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. We've got some webcast and technical trainings coming up this year in September. Find out why traditional data security can't be zero trust and learn how to reduce the blast radius of your cloud infrastructure. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast or /on demand for previously recorded ones. No stranger to the show, Sumedh Thakar is the Chief Product Officer at Qualys and oversees worldwide engineering, including the DevOps at Qualys, which he's here tonight to talk about. I'm so excited. Sumedh, welcome.
Thank you so much. Always a pleasure being here and talking to you guys.
Yes. We've also had Joff Thayer, who joined us. Joff, welcome.
Hi, good evening. It's good to be here.
Yes, very nice. So, Sumedh, you have kind of teased us a little bit about DevOps, how we apply DevOps, security to DevOps, but also how Qualys is implementing DevOps today. And I'm hoping for like a little bit like what goes on under the veil at Qualys and how you're doing the DevOps process and applying security at those various steps.
Yeah, so we actually did a lot of work on our platform the last 4 or so years, essentially going back, early back in the day, and our history. We started before cloud was fashionable, everybody now uses it as a fashion statement, but back in the day, we used technologies, PHP, Oracle, etc., that was available to really build a multi-tenant platform, which was pretty innovative at that time, and what happened over the last few years is as we have expanded that platform into many other areas, getting into patch management, EDR, collecting large volumes of data. Like we're collecting, we're indexing like 6 trillion data points in Elasticsearch today. So we realized a few years ago that we had to go through our own digital transformation and get out of that more monolithic PHP Oracle stack that we had, and move towards being able to do microservices and create a platform where we can add functionality much faster, because that we felt was very existential to basically our product and the platform. We really needed to make those changes, and so we went into that really bringing in the new practices, being able to do DevOps. And that was very natural, because being a SaaS organization, you really are always in that mode of iterating fast and creating new functionality and smaller chunks and pushing it out quickly. And so we are always looking at how can we make this process better. And that's kind of what really pushed us into that journey of having our development team do more and more automation, so that we had less and less manual effort being done by the IT operations team that was deploying the product. And so we really kind of took a big plunge into that whole DevOps movement. And I think that really has shown how quickly we have been able to innovate and bring new capabilities to the product. So it's been a very interesting journey, looking at the silos that existed and the changes that we had to make DevOps successful in the organization.
When did container? I mean, you obviously Qualys is very forward thinking with cloud. When did container start to enter the mix, and what was that like when you made that kind of shift into assuming container based architecture?
Yeah, I mean, about 3-4 years ago, actually it's pretty well tied into the thought process of moving into the cloud, or when you're doing this re-architecture, this is the question everybody kind of goes through, right? Is how am I going to do? Am I going to do VMware on-prem? Am I going to go and move into the cloud? And adding containers and the ability to micro-segment the various processes was critical. So we were definitely going to go forward with containerization, and that had some resistance early on because people didn't know about it and they didn't know how it was going to function. But we pretty quickly realized that containerization was going to give us the ability to go bare metal, which for us as a SaaS provider significantly saves costs, so we could actually move into more of a commodity hardware that would allow us to expand the capabilities without having to pay significant amount into very specialized hardware, as we've had to do with Oracle or VMware or some of these providers that provided more of an enterprise capability. And so moving into containerization, we struggled initially because there was not enough information out there and how we make it successful. We went with Docker Swarm, that didn't really quite work out as well. And so we moved to Kubernetes. And so that's been an ongoing journey. But it was really sort of a revolutionary thing for the team to go that direction. And, I was kind of thinking, well, seems just like multi-threading, right? Like we went from a mainframe that did everything to Linux distributed computing. And then from there, we went to like, maybe we don't need so many machines. We need just virtual machines. And then from virtual machines, we moved into like, we need to have multitasking on the same box. And then multitasking went to multi-threading. And it just seems like we keep reinventing the wheel. But the idea that you can use the same machine to have different containers running on it is not necessarily new, but just implemented in a different way.
Absolutely. What are some suggestions that you have based on your own experiences, building it out at Qualys, of the different points you can add security in the DevOps process, right? Like, do you start with the static code analysis in the developer IDE, and then do you move to SCA? Do you move to dynamic testing, use your own product to test those containers before they go to deployment? Like, what's the journey from we're going to start writing code all the way to like it's deployed in production?
Yeah, we sort of had a pivotal moment when we realized, and I got one of these reports. We're a FedRAMP certified platform, and so I got one of these reports where somebody spun up a virtual machine in the infrastructure, and it had vulnerabilities from like 2 years ago that showed up in a scan, and we were like, how is that even possible? Like, and we realized that the processes where these virtual machines that were forming the base of the platform were built like a while ago, and people just basically did that thing completely mechanically without thinking through, and they would just take that virtual machine and they will spin it up, and then somebody will go in and they will spend hours patching those systems, and that they would do it over and over and over again every day. And then we were like, well, this doesn't make any sense. How can we essentially do everything that we can to eliminate as many security issues as we can in the DevOps or in the development journey before it went to production, right? So the earlier model was developers didn't really necessarily care about security. They wrote what they had to write. They threw it over the fence, and now it was up to the IT and the security team to figure out how to secure it. And so the first thing was, well, put a firewall around it, and then you do vulnerability scans, and you keep patching the same stuff over and over again. So the real thing that really pushed us in that was let's basically have a motto inside Qualys, which is, irrespective of the tools or the vendors or whatever it is, we are going to do everything that we can to fix every possible issue in a development before it goes to production, because that meant that we had less things to do and worry about, and more important things to worry about in the production environment. So we were not spending our time patching machines.
You say that like that's not a common practice for software development.
It was it was definitely a mind shift change, right? Internally, people, and it was very interesting because people were very excited about DevOps because they were like, oh, we're going to eliminate that IT and the security team. And we're just going to, like, my code, I'm going to write it and I'm just going to push it through the pipeline and it's just going to show up in production. And that's all well and good, except that now when there is a security issue, you cannot blame anybody else, right?
Yeah, you own it now.
All those teams. So now there was like this epiphany after a year of doing this where people were like, well, I guess we need to be responsible for our own code. And so we kind of got into developers saying, okay, we're going to engineer security into the overall pipeline and do as much as we can early on to eliminate those issues. So that helped us move to a model where we were building images with all the vulnerabilities fixed on almost a daily basis, right? So we're not using old virtual machines to spin up images and then going back and relooking at the same vulnerabilities over and over again.
Yeah, and I love this philosophy and approach, and it's more than just a technology shift, right? Sumedh,
Right.
you said it's a mindset change, right? That every time, and we do this here at Security Weekly, I mean, we're much smaller, right? Like one developer, as opposed to hundreds, at Qualys, right? But the same principle applies in that every time I spin up a new development environment or I rebuild my containers locally, it goes out and it pulls down all the latest software libraries, all the latest updates to Linux. And guess what? If something breaks because we patch something organically just by rebuilding the container, now as a developer, it's your job to fix that before you go check in that code, before it goes off to testing process, before it goes into production. Like, let's just fix things as we go. And it sounds like you've adopted the similar mindset, right?
Yeah, and that was a focus. And then we started breaking it down to say, well, there are certain areas that are more on the image side. There are other areas which are more on the, base image for the virtual machine itself. Some are on the container, some are on the application, right? Like, I mean, it's one thing to have it, but then when you put your application, how do you make sure you test it in as many ways? And the one thing that came out of that also was that you can't have that speed of doing this if you don't have automation in QA.
Yeah.
So you can't patch your machines and stuff every day, pull down the latest software, etc., if you don't have a way to do a massive automated test of the entire functionality, because otherwise you're going to just break things, right?
That's
And
key.
I think that's something we learned quickly, and we put in place like a way to be able to test any changes that we made in an automated manner so that we reduce the time it took us to certify this thing before it went into production.
Super important point. Yeah,
Jeff.
So I have a quick question.
Oh, Jeff's got a question first.
All right.
Oh, okay. Jeff
All right.
first.
Jeff and then Joff.
Age before beauty, Jeff. This is sort of a two-part question. When I first came out into the private sector back in the late 90s and we were trying to, teach basic security to how to build a security program to companies that were venturing onto this newfangled thing called the internet, I swear we used to teach about software development life cycles and building security into every step of the process. You make it sound like this is a new idea, and it's always been that way. My proof point, part two of the question is, it's in the PCI standard, and you knew you were going to get a PCI question sooner or later, but PCI requires you to build security into every phase of a software development lifecycle. So to put that in the form of a question, a DevOps question, it seems like the DevOps world, not that anybody seemed to ever follow a software development lifecycle, but they seem to embrace that they could abandon that. At least that's one way to interpret, or at least one way I interpret what you're saying. Why is that? Why do developers think that, we finally have a reason why we don't have to follow a development lifecycle? Any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's not quite that. It's basically you shorten. I mean, you remember the waterfall and the agile battle back in the day, and we ended up basically just doing mini waterfalls because agile ended up being like too much work for us. And so you have to do whatever fits your way that you develop. But the idea there is that you don't short circuit the software development lifecycle, but you go beyond that. So while you still have to do your design documents, and you still have to do your code review and your QA testing and your unit testing and your integration testing. It used to stop just at that, and the developers, they didn't really look at security, and they then threw this thing over the fence. And you remember that from the time that you actually had a functionality in the product to the time that it actually went out into production would be a month or so, because of all the various processes and the certifications and all of that. And the desire to innovate faster got people to say, it's not that we're short-circuiting necessarily this as software development lifecycle, but short-circuiting the various processes that follow it, right? Like getting the builds done, getting those builds pushed out manually to the different servers because you're using rsync, etc. And then manually somebody had to go make the configurations and one by one enable the servers, and you had to have a big downtime. So the automation that the DevOps revolution sort of brought together was allowing developers to also define in production with code how this thing should deploy, how this thing should work. And I think that is more the way I look at that is it's not that we short-circuited SDLC, but the DevOps thing brought an automation mindset. So while all of this was always required by all standards, there just never really was any good means to do this to the extent that we are able to do today because of the realigning of the pipeline and the realigning of the way the builds are done. And also containerization brought about that notion of breaking down monolithic functionality of a big application build into smaller individual services that you could quickly iterate and then push out. And they had a much quicker time in the way you can build and push them out, and they were not dependent on each other. And I think that's sort of the combination of those things pushed more towards automation and is making DevOps something that people are looking at that as a way to really speed up the end-to-end process and not just the development lifecycle.
Well said. Joff, you had a question.
Yes. So my question is really trust in the stack. So, as a security professional, I've watched over time as we have essentially migrated trust, the trust boundary, kind of up the stack, right? So as we get into containerization, we are trusting more and more that the layers underneath us are built appropriately and that, we won't see some sort of flaw or vulnerability in those layers below us. So my question to you is, how far do you extend that trust? If you look at Docker Hub, for example, and you bring in like a Python Alpine build, or you bring in an Ubuntu-based image, can you trust it? Or is your philosophy, without giving away things you shouldn't, is your philosophy just to bring all that in-house, build your own repositories as the base, and then scale up and scale out from there?
Yeah, so I think you have to have the trust and verify, right? So I think it's a good, to me that there's Docker Hub with all these images are a little bit like open source, right? You can basically bring this code as part of your application, and that's sort of what we do is that we leverage, if somebody has built a good image for a base image that we can bring in, whether it's Docker Hub or wherever it is, we will bring that in. But then we do put that through our testing as part of the overall testing cycle from a security perspective as we are building it, right? So we won't do that as something that we just blindly trust. Of course, unless somebody came up with a repository where it was very well certified images that were available, and then you could trust that, a little bit like your mobile apps, right? Like if you got an app through an app store, you felt much better that this was a certified app because Apple, looked at it, etc. Versus if you're just downloading an APK and trying to spin something up. So, I think it's a little bit like that, where it's good that it's available and it helps, but I wouldn't trust. I don't trust that directly to use it as is. We do make sure that we do our own testing on those base images before we put those in.
And I think the benefit for Qualys customers and Qualys itself is that through acquisition you acquired some great technology, because we know the team at Layered Insight, right? And I think whether you build it yourself at any level or get an image of any kind from anywhere else, it still has to go through that verification process, right? And those features are built now into, obviously, right, the Qualys platform, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, as that thing has matured, right? Like security in DevOps, and I don't really like to call it that the DevSecOps, because I think it's more about still DevOps and automation. Like you don't say like Dev QA Ops or whatever it is, right? Like it's really built in there. It has to be part of that. And so the security processes in DevOps have also matured, right? We've gone through. Initially, we were just doing image scan, and then we added the ability to do software composition analysis, application security, etc. So the more we can do across these layers, the more we feel like, for example, we're not doing configuration drift monitoring, and so we started adding configuration checks as well as part of our CI/CD pipeline, because that was always the number one issue that you had, is that somebody went in production, manually configured something, and now a bunch of stuff broke because they put the wrong preference key or whatever it is. And so I think that's sort of the journey, that as we have matured, we have been adding more advanced capability into the stack, and you have to basically let the development team. So the way we do that is the security team needs to provide the policy, right? So that's kind of where we draw the line, is how do you do the trust and verify? Is the development team can decide how they want to build something, how they want to do the automation, but then there has to be these security gates that are put in certain places along the pipeline, where the policy of what passes or fails. As an example, right? The developers could use Jenkins or whatever it is. They can bring that image from wherever they want, but then the security team basically defines that the build will not succeed unless this scan happens in between the build being kicked off and being pushed out to your Artifactory, right? So that process is where the security team comes in and say, we're going to use this tool in the CI/CD pipeline, and this is the policy that's going to decide whether this is going to be approved or not approved. The developers can do whatever else automation they want in the pipeline, but then that gate has to be passed before they can go to the next level. And that's how we inject that security in a few places. So that way security is at the table, and they are defining the policy, so that developers don't just say, okay, I'm just going to remove this vulnerability from the requirement because it's not passing, right? So there is still that check and balance that we can put in the pipeline.
It's interesting, Joff talked about trust, and Sumedh, you talked about automation, and it's very key to the DevOps process. And I find that one of the challenges that many struggle with is, once you've got this more complex system, you've got systems that implement your CI/CD pipeline, you've got the application itself that's being deployed from that pipeline, and that really brings forth the requirement of the ability to manage secrets, right? Because things have to happen automatically. It means things have to trust other things and use secrets and passwords and keys. How do you manage those without giving away, internals inside Qualys, right? But general advice, how do we manage secrets? What's your advice there?
Yeah, and this is part of the re-architecture that everybody's going through, right? And this is the difference between a lift and shift digital transformation, where you're just saying, I'm going to take my virtual image and then put that out in the cloud, versus truly looking at how do you re-architect your entire service so that secrets management, etc., configuration management can be done in a seamless way from using a centralized architecture, right? And so today we leverage vaults, obviously, and a few other methods, but primarily the ability to have these vaults where we use these tokens and we share these secrets between various applications, so the trust comes through the vault, but the actual values of those keys are then set by the operations team in production, so that the developers are not the ones that are, because you'll find that, right? They've done something, they put it on GitHub, and then that same secret that they have checked in, which is open to public, is being used in production environment as well. So that's where the automation comes into play, is that in the pipeline, when this thing is available and ready to go, the operations team has to go in and they have to be the one putting in the values for these secrets, etc., so that we have that sort of some separation of duty between these two teams, and then you can essentially achieve a better security. But today, vaults are really the way to go when you have a new microservices architecture, because they do provide you a robust way to manage your secrets and manage your trust. And this is important because microservices, you break down everything into so many services, and they all have to talk to each other, and there has to be a trust between those, so that you won't be able to bypass that and just start to have a rogue service trying to call another service to get this information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make another comment, if you don't mind, Paul. Just rolling back just a few minutes, but to the misconfiguration or the configuration check comment, that's really, really important, because as a pen tester in the industry, one of the really probably most critical things that we take advantage of, I'm looking for words here, but one of the most common things that we take advantage of is misconfiguration. And so if you build in configuration checks into the CI/CD pipeline, you build in those checks as you're going through your process, you have the potential of eliminating that avenue of attack that is in fact more common than even straight up software vulnerabilities. And I think Tyler and other pen testers I know in the industry, we can tell you right now, it's not really that often that we use a traditional heap overflow or stack overflow or one of these traditional machine-based remote attacks anymore. It's more misconfiguration-based than anything else.
Sloppiness leads to misconfiguration.
We could have an entire other conversation about this. This is like a area that I really feel passionately about, because I totally agree that too many times people in their silos focus only on the traditional vulnerability management as a way to say, oh, I've patched all my software vulnerabilities, but their configurations are so horrendous that in many ways they are more susceptible to being compromised because they have misconfigured their systems. They don't have network level authentication enabled. They don't have these other things set, and much more likely to get compromised. And so I always find that really, funny is that some of these vendors, when they talk about, they have this exposure score, this, that, based only on vulnerabilities being fixed. You have no idea, the kind of bad stuff that misconfigurations bring about. And in many ways, it's much, much worse than a software vulnerability, because it's so much easier to take advantage of a misconfiguration, which tends to happen all the time when you use manual processes versus automation. I think that's really fundamental thought process there, is that these configuration issues are really as important or even more important than your software vulnerabilities. Totally agree with you.
And it's interesting too, like in terms of a patch versus a configuration, in terms of impact and difficulty to fix once it gets in production. I've found I would rather make those configuration mistakes early, fix them and adjust everything, because once that gets into production, now I got to go make that configuration change in production. That's almost worse than me trying to patch software in production, to be quite honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brings, that there's just overall the importance of some people go just the extreme, like, we're doing security in our CI/CD pipeline, so we don't really need to do anything in production. I literally was on a call with a customer today who was telling us that, I scanned my images, so I don't need to do anything. And the number of times developers will work around that by creating lean images, and then as soon as it spins up in AWS, they'll download a vulnerable Java or library or something from an S3 bucket, and then your machine is suddenly vulnerable. But you need both, right? And the idea is that for us, when we moved to this process, it really eliminated like 60% of our patching needs in production were eliminated, because we were reducing misconfigurations and vulnerabilities going out, and our teams could now scale up to be able to do a better job of monitoring compromises, etc., in production environment, rather than just spending all their time trying to fix those misconfigurations, right? I mean, it's like it's a lot like a car, right? When you buy a car, you don't go buy a Mercedes or whatever it is, and then you go to another store and now you buy a seat belt and then have that fitted, and then you go somewhere else and then you go get parking sensor or whatever it is, a collision sensor, and then get that fitted. the security that is needed for that thing to run, like an application, is already built in, comes completely built in, and that doesn't mean that at runtime you don't need a technology that is monitoring distance between the cars and all of that, but you essentially need both. And the more we get that done in the production or rather manufacturing phases, I should say, the better it is to focus on other issues in the production environment.
Hey, so I got another question. You had commented on the observation that I've made and many other people have made, is that containerization is really good at offering you the ability to perform essentially micro segmentation in your application, right? To build up little containers to do specific jobs. Can you comment kind of on the balance between that micro application architecture or micro segmented architecture versus the security, and is there a space where you see it's going to go too far into this sort of micro segmented application architecture?
I don't think from a security perspective it's that much of a deal, but at the end of the day, right, it's a good question, right? I mean, good architecture, you have to find the balance, because containers do have overhead, right? Like if you take a box and you run, X number of containers, there is a certain amount of overhead to run containers. So it's significantly lower than running multiple virtual machines. But so if you break down your containers and microservices down to little functions, and you run each of them as a microservice, as a container, that is going to cause you a lot more overhead in terms of just being able to run the additional services, etc., that's needed from the containerization platform to run that. Versus if you find the right balance, then you can have. Really, it comes down to that. It's a microservice, so you should break it down into something that offers a service as a unit rather than an individual function or a line of code or whatever it is. But there is a need for that as well, and that's why you see something like Lambda come up more, because people want to break that down even more into functions and be able to use that. But that's a different type of a platform, and I think that is up and coming, where in some cases you're going to have even more breakdown in terms of how small you want to go in the functionality when you break it up. Now, I think in general, I feel from a security perspective, anything that you break it down into its smallest unit is better for security, because it's much better and much easier when you have a defined input and output and a smaller amount of functionality, because then you can do a much better job at protecting the input and protecting the output, and being able to put the right security tools, because it's a limited functionality, and that's what you need to worry about. So I think from a security perspective, the better defined interfaces you have, the better it is and easier it is to manage the security, versus a big monolithic application where it has too many entry points, too many exits, and too many different paths that the code can follow internally. So we try to find the balance between that breaking down something and the overhead of just running these containers, because if you have too many containers, then the density really becomes an issue.
Oh, great answer. So yeah, my thinking was sort of drifting towards, how many trust boundaries, if you like, between containers can you actually manage and scale from a security perspective? But you can balance that by the fact that if there are these really discrete, well-defined units, that trust boundary actually gives you an opportunity as well to actually perhaps even inspect or have some sort of insertion point between those trust boundaries. So I think there's an interesting conversation there we're going to see evolve over time.
That's why the east-west traffic, looking at that actually is very helpful from a container perspective, because in general, if you know that this functionality or this service should only be called by this other service, it's much easier to manage that, because you have that trust boundary and it's a well-defined boundary, and you can manage it at the network level, through the containerization platform as well. And in terms of the boundaries in containerization, I don't look at the count as much, because when you go into microservices and containerization and leveraging that mechanism, you are automating. You cannot do this manually. So if you are doing automation, and then at point, whether you deploy 10 trust boundaries or 25 trust boundaries, it's all done via automation anyway. So it's more about, how do you build the right mechanism and the layers. I mean, the security has to be done in layers. That really doesn't change, no matter whether it's containers or cloud or whatever it is, right? Like you still need to have the right trust being used from the vault perspective. You need to have east-west boundaries from a microsegmentation perspective, which of course becomes easier when you have services where the service is only supposed to do one thing, and it's supposed to fetch the data from this Elasticsearch node. And now that only one service is allowed to call this service. You can manage that much better.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jeff had a question.
Well, at this point, probably 3 or 4, since my hand's been up for quite a while. To work backwards, your description of making it easier to secure code by breaking it down into smaller pieces and smaller parts, that seems intuitively to be just better code anyway. The smaller you can make it, the more you can get your arms around it and make it work better and function better and more efficiently, and also cover the security things. It just seems like the more complex things are in general, the harder they are to make them work and not break, yet alone be secure. I wanted to go back, though, to when we were talking about misconfiguration being sort of the Achilles heel of most organizations, which I too agree with. But I wanted to ask, because we several of us sort of touched on a little bit, but intuitively, what's the opposite of misconfiguration? A good or secure configuration? And my question was simply going to be, how do we teach organizations to get there? How do we do it in an effective, comprehensive, across the board manner? Because the pen testers will tell you, they only have to find one misconfiguration in any obscure place to be successful, to win. Because you work at Qualys, I suspect you're going to have a certain perspective on this, but I wanted to just ask the question, how do we get people to do the opposite of misconfiguration consistently, which would be do good configurations, secure configurations?
I mean, I don't want to go back to the days when I used to code, but I remember other developers in the team who used to, there was no standard for configuration, right? Like my application wants to talk to the database, and I'm just going to save the password, in a file in the root directory of my code and just use that. And that's how I got my credentials to talk to the database, as an example, right? And I think that the more you break these things down into trust boundaries and microservices, and the more you re-architect the overall application and the platform to have vaults and use more technologies like that, the better the architecture is going to be, right? So today, more and more, the newer developers, they really just take it for granted that they're going to use trust boundaries with being able to use vaults, etc. And I think that's an education that needs to be done and needs to be part of the architecture. I mean, there was a comment earlier about how security in SDLC has sort of always been there. It's always been there in a document that you expect the developer to read on day one when they join, and then there was no real good way to sort of enforce it. But I think when the architects are re-architecting these applications, they define these trust vaults and how they should be used and where information should be saved and how that should be done. And typically the misconfigurations were happening on the operations team side, not so much the developers, right? Because the developer will say, go install this on 50 servers, and each of those 50 servers need to have these configuration settings that I'm going to read from this particular file. And the struggle always was, how are we going to get this to 50 places at once? How are we going to? So a lot of times, people would log in, they would manually update the configurations, etc. So I think leveraging the microsegmentation, leveraging the new way of doing the architecture, and then the automation, the only way I feel like you can defend yourself against these misconfiguration is to eliminate the manual processes that go into making these configurations, because that's really where the issue happens. Oh, I forgot that. Oh, I put an extra semicolon, and so now the line is ineffective and it didn't take effect, etc. Right? So the more you can do this at the build time and an automated process that, and which is really cool thing now with Docker, etc., is you can do these rolling upgrades. You don't have to do anything. The system does it for you. You just say, here's a new image, and then in a manner of rolling upgrade, bring this machine down, bring it back up with a new image, and then put it back into the service. And this is where you used to have so many errors happening in the past as well. And so I think that leveraging the automation capability is, I feel like, is one of the only ways you can really eliminate or reduce these misconfigurations.
Yeah. You had me when you said standard, because that's the answer that I was looking for. There needs to be standards that are followed for whatever it is.
Yeah, but also, Sumedh, it sounds like reducing the opportunity that you have as a developer or ops person to introduce a configuration error, right? Reduce the risk of that. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, look at what people moving to the cloud has not reduced the number of compromises. They just have shifted. You have your S3 bucket, so you don't need to update the software. But how many times do we see somebody misconfigured their S3 bucket because they manually logged into the console, made some changes, forgot about it, didn't realize? So things you used to have more with firewalls, now you see those with PaaS services.
And you really have to go out of your way today in AWS to make an S3 bucket public, to be honest, right? Exactly. They made it really hard, and people still do it.
but that doesn't even have to happen, right? I mean, I've been on tests in the past where people have accidentally left, Subversion repositories, and this is going a little ways back before Git was as popular, but Subversion repositories on public web servers where I've downloaded S3 keys, and then all of a sudden I'm talking to the S3 buckets, right? Just with a little bit of Python code. So I think Sumedh has a really, really, really good point. The fact that you can automate the standard is probably the most powerful and useful thing of the CI/CD and containerization pipelines that we've got, because you take the decision of just writing a file out to some temp space, or having some sort of insecure mechanism for loading a key or a certificate or something. You take that out of the developer's hands, which I think is huge.
And the way you can enforce some of that is, like, for example, certain parts of our infrastructure, we actually disable sysadmin login to those machines because there is no reason.
Right.
All patching and all configuration updates now should happen automatically. So we even eliminate the possibility for somebody to be able to log in and actually do something manually that can end up, causing that machine to be exposed externally, because the automation has become so solid and so pervasive.
Yeah. So in some ways, Jeff made a comment that complexity is increasing, but I don't necessarily agree. I think in some ways the increased automation.
That's not what I said, Jeff.
Okay, paraphrasing.
I said complexity increases the likelihood of insecure and inoperable software.
Absolutely right. But in some ways,
in a manual environment, yes.
Yeah, in some ways, I think the automation, though, actually enables us to simplify some of these processes ultimately in the end, which is an advantage. I mean, yes, there's additional complexity in the back end that could introduce potential vulnerabilities, but that's concentrated in a potentially a smaller group of people that are more focused on that particular issue. So I see nothing but opportunity and advantages to the world in this space. In fact, I wish it had happened 20 years ago, to be honest.
Well, we had to know what was bad for us to know now what is good, right?
Then I wouldn't have a job? Oh, no, man. Come on. Yeah. We're all riding waves in this industry. We'd all have a job somewhere.
I wanted to ask Joff and Larry, our pen testers, what's the ratio of misconfigurations that you guys trip over and use on your jobs that are, OS hardware type based or more, traditional applications, database and things like that versus software things. But then I thought, well, given that the whole world is becoming software, including network and firewalls, anything that's cloud based, is all software anyway, so it's probably moot to even ask the question.
No,
But I was curious.
It's a
at
lot.
the time.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah, well, and much of the infrastructure is code, and I think just touch on the configuration thing. Sumedh, you almost made it sound easy, right? But the critical component to this process is automating your testing. So
Yes.
if you've got a new library, you've got an OS update, or you've got a configuration change, yes, that can be done quickly, but it all goes through an automated testing process. And if you don't have that process, you're not much better than you were before, really. Even if you built out other pieces of your pipeline, that testing is critical. So, Sumedh, I was wondering if you could talk about advice you have for those of us that are working on building that automated testing.
Yeah, I think if you look at now how patching is being done, right? You today have the opportunity to never have the need to patch a server in production, right? If there is a vulnerability that is discovered on the build, I talked earlier about how you can have rolling updates, etc., and rolling restarts of the systems. You can actually build a complete automation where when a new vulnerability is detected on an image, that image will automatically, or that process will automatically go out, pull in the newer patch version of that particular software library, rebuild the image, and push that image out to production without any human being involved in this process. This can be achieved for quite a bit of software that is out there because the way these vulnerabilities are now published and the newer versions are available, etc. Except the biggest question is that of trust, right? As soon as I bring in a new library and I rebuild the image, is that going to break my application?
Yeah.
And the only way you can actually do this is with automation in the test process. So we put a lot of emphasis and learning from our failures, of course, we put a lot of emphasis on building an automated test bed where you can have this automation completely test your entire end-to-end application in a very finite amount of time and covering more and more use cases. Because if you don't have that, first of all, the automation is the only way that in a short period of time you can cover thousands of test cases. If you want to have humans do that, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be consistent. You're going to have things, what will humans usually do in a short period of time? They're going to sample. They're going to do sampling of the test cases and test some of those and push those out. So just that hiring a team and being very, very focused on building automation test bed really helps and is a critical component if you want to do this automation of security in the DevOps pipeline. You want to be able to test all the changes because then you can do it in an automated way, right? I patch the machine, I pull in a new library, automatically rebuild, and now I push that image to my test farm. An hour later, entire testing process has gone end to end. Nothing was flagged. So I feel comfortable pushing it out to production and that everything will work correctly.
So is your QA team now just another development team?
Yeah, I mean, today that's why they don't even want to be called, quality assurance. They want some sort of a software developer in test or, automation engineer or something like that, right? That's even the terminology of just calling them quality assurance or QE is changing quite a bit because more and more focus is being pushed on. You have a smaller team that is doing the functional testing of new functionality in a manual way, but every functionality that they test, they need to add that as an automation test case into the big test suite that we have. And so that way you reduce, we almost flip the ratio from where in the past you had a big manual testing team and a couple of people were focused on some automation to now having a few people who are doing the manual testing and a much larger team that is just essentially doing automation and testing using automation.
Yeah. No. And what are some of the other like organization and role-based changes when we go in this shift to, we call it digital transformation or the shift to DevOps, right? There's a lot of technology changes, but there's a lot of organization and role changes within the organization and how people interact and the different roles that they play. Can you talk about how that changed over time, Sumedh?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we used to have a separate tree of QA people, a separate development tree, and then you have a separate operations people and, separate security team. And there was always the throw over the fence approach for everything, right? They would be like, dev is like, I've done my job, and QA didn't catch the bug, and that went to production. I'm like, well, it's your code. You introduced the bug, right? You can't blame QA for not catching it because you didn't do enough testing on your side. So one of the first things we did was essentially combine the dev and the QA teams into a single organization that was reporting to the director or the VP of that group. So they are responsible for delivering a working tested solution. And there's no more silos of saying, oh, the QA organization is a different organization. So the first step was to basically have under the development or that lead to have both dev and QA combined working together. So they are responsible for delivering quality and the code and quality, not just the code and somebody else for the quality. Then
right now, Sumedh, that doesn't mean developers are testing their own code, right? Because that was always my concern years ago when we were merging.
It does encourage that more, because when they are part of the same team, we start to notice that the developers are working closely with the QA teams to add the test cases that they are testing also part of that. So what happens is that now when the developer does some changes, they can use the test suite, automation test suite against their code quickly before they push it out into and check the code in. And so they are motivated now to add more automation to that existing automation suite so that they can test their own code much faster. None of the developers want to go and manually test anything. That's right. That's just in the genes. So, but then the second issue we had was the operations team, right? That was in silos, taking the code from development, and then they were going through a lot of their process and pushing things and all of that.
Works on my machine. It's Ops problem now.
And that's where it came from, because how do we publish your machine? Right?
Well, in that model, Sumedh, right, when it gets developed and then it gets tested, and you hand it off to Ops, and Ops has a problem, everyone's always like, well, it worked on my machine, right? Why doesn't it work on your machine? I don't know. It worked on mine.
Right, exactly. And so we initially, when we started DevOps, in fact, I had the DevOps team reporting into operations. And we quickly realized that they had no ability to understand how to fix this at the source, right? Initially, we thought, okay, we're going to have some automation team in IT that was going to help make this better. But then we quickly realized that, and we then folded the operations organization, IT operations organization, into the development organization and engineering head, so that we also had a DevOps concept where they are responsible for delivering the end-to-end. And then this is not some different team that they can blame to say, well, it worked on my machine and now I don't know what happened in production, right? You need to have that. So we definitely saw major shifts in the organization from what it used to be 10 years ago, maybe, to now, where just like a QA person is part of the team and a developer is part of the team, now a DevOps person is also part of that team, and they are responsible for their microservice and their code to make sure that it's going out to production. Now, the concept of site reliability engineering, SRE, came into being recently as well, again, to bring automation in the monitoring. So there's definitely major changes happening in the dev organizations. If you truly want to go in this direction of leveraging this automation and doing things faster, it's a different shift that's happening.
Yeah, Google, I believe, went through a similar kind of shift, right? And it sounds like in when you described your use case is very similar, is that rather than having all these different departments that had these functional areas, you made teams that are more functional teams, right? Where the members of the team have different areas of expertise, and they're all responsible for delivering a quality product, whether that's security, operations, quality of code, and they're working together rather than these different silos is really the lesson that I'm drawing.
Right, and that becomes easier, to our earlier point, when you have smaller manageable microservices. Because now a team unit is responsible for a contained functionality with defined interfaces.
Yep. And now, is security built into these teams, and also has a separate kind of role as an overseer for recommending policy?
Yeah, so that's an interesting breakdown, right? So we have security folks as part of the automation. So we have the automation team in the development organization who's focused on building security capabilities into the pipeline, into the product. but they are not the security team that is setting the policy. So that is still the more traditional isolated security team that is setting the policy of what should be checked, how it should be checked. So we don't leave that up to the developers, but then the security team, that part of the development organization, are focused on how to build the automation to get security tools and tests in there. But then the policy of what should be checked or not is done by the security operations team. And then they also are the ones who are now managing, or I should say reviewing, the signals that are coming out of the production security tools to see if a compromise is going on. This was very different earlier because the security organization used to be the one who was spending a lot of their time installing security products after you got things to production.
Right.
So you kind of had an entire engineering team almost as part of the security team who were doing their best after the fact to build in, their security tools and collect all the data. And then you had the NOC team or the SOC team, which was the analyst who were then looking at the signals that were coming out of all of these different tools. And so that has shifted, where that security engineering team, what used to be a team that used to add these products after the fact, moved into the development organization. So they are doing it upfront. And then the security operations and the monitoring team are more focused on looking at what signals are being produced and what's passing and what's failing, and deciding the policy for the organization on where we are going to do the checks and how we're going to do the checks.
That's awesome. That is super helpful, actually, for a whole host of reasons. Any more questions for Sumedh?
None for me.
Sumedh, anything that you would like to share on this topic with our audience tonight?
Yeah, I think I talk a lot with the CISOs and CIOs, and I think somebody said this earlier, which is really true, is that it's an opportunity, right? Being able to, when you're going through your digital transformation, don't look at lift and shift, really look at redoing your security and the architecture and building security into the architecture. And I think the cost that is going to be there to do that is going to be well worth it, because otherwise the cost of building security after the fact is just tremendous and it doesn't really work. And so we've learned from that process. And obviously that's why you see that in the Qualys product line also, a lot of our capabilities now have a DevOps component built into it, so that you can take, for example, vulnerability management. You can build vulnerability management directly into the CI/CD pipeline leveraging Qualys. We have the layered insight acquisition that you mentioned, Paul, that is providing the ability to instrument these images in the CI/CD pipeline. When you are doing your cloud configurations, you have that ability to do that in early upfront through automation built into that. So in general, we have customers that absolutely have automated end-to-end everything from their AMIs and the testing of those, and putting the required security agents on that, to collecting the telemetry information and the analysis, etc. Right? And I think no matter what the tool you use, the idea there is that leverage this transformation that is happening right now, and take the opportunity to really redo your security the right way. And you really want to focus on the vendors that are providing you true native CI/CD and DevOps capabilities, rather than the others who are just providing you a virtual machine that you have to take and deploy into the cloud yourself. I think that to me is the first red flag, when a vendor comes and says, here's my virtual machine that you can run in your environment. Like, that itself is like, okay, something is not right if I have to manage your service essentially in my environment. So that's, I think that's something that, I truly believe in. And we see that a lot with our customers, and really an interesting topic. Happy to talk more about that some other time as well.
Fantastic. Sumedh, thank you for appearing on Pulse Security Weekly. It was informative as always.
Always fun talking to you guys.
Absolutely. Folks who want to learn more and get a free trial, vulnerability management detection and response, VMDR, you can go to securityweekly.com/Qualys. With that, we'll take a short break, come back with the security news. Stay tuned.
NetSparker, the developers of a comprehensive automated web security platform that includes web vulnerability scanning, assessment, and management. NetSparker's desktop and cloud-based security solutions employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities and provides a proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Want to be more thorough while also working faster? It doesn't matter if you're on the red or blue team, an augmented reality overlay can enable you to be more thorough and faster at the same time. No glasses, no goggles. Polarity delivers this superpower as an overlay on top of your existing workflow and tools. The free Community Edition connects to the data you care about to overlay the context you need to make informed decisions. Apply for early access today at securityweekly.com/polarity. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Quick announcement before we get started. BSides Boston is back in action for their 10-year anniversary. The conference will be held on Saturday, September 26th. Tickets are only $10. You can get yours at BSidesBOS.org. Some of the Security Weekly team will be in our own channel on the BSides Boston Discord server, answering questions and possibly doing some contests. And actually, here to talk more about BSides Boston, right before we dive into the news, is Lea Snyder, the lead organizer for BSides Boston. Lea, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, nice to have you. This is your first time on the show, right?
It is.
Lea and I have known each other for a really long time, previous lives. So yeah, it's nice to have you on the show, Lea. Obviously, this year's the year of virtual conferences.
Yep.
So while it says BSides Boston, this is a virtual event that you can attend from anywhere in the world, correct?
That is correct. And we've got people coming in from, I just pulled the stats the other day, all over the world, which is really interesting.
That's awesome. So Lea, I guess kind of take us through, our standard conference thing. Like, what are some of the talks that are going to happen? What are some of the events? And tell us about the event.
Yeah, totally. So we're really excited to bring BSides Boston back. If you had ever gone to BSides Boston before, you would have either gone to the Microsoft Nerd Center, or perhaps you were at the Harvard campus when we were at Harvard. And then we kind of took a hiatus. Part of that's my fault. I moved to the West Coast and actually moved well before I took a break, but just needed to decompress a little since I'm way other coast. It makes scheduling hard. But we're back this year and we've got 3 awesome tracks. We've been tweeting about all the different talks. So if you are into pen tests, we have pen test talks. If you're into hardware hacking, we have hardware hacking talks. If you're into hacker rights, we've got those type of talks. You want to learn some skills, we've got talks for that. And then we just have a ton of activities. So we have a really strong village lead this year, and she's been amazing at getting us a ton of villages. So we have, just like in previous years, we have a lockpick village. We have a capture the flag competition. But we also have the biohacking village, the ICS village, and mental health hackers. And additionally, we're kicking off our week on the Monday, the 21st, which is, well ahead of the conference, which is on the 26th, with a Secure Code Warrior tournament. It's code-based security challenges. So we've got basically 6 days of activities running. There's also workshops by WorkshopCon because we partnered with them on Friday. So no matter what you want to do or what you enjoy at a conferences, we probably have something that appeals to you.
Lea, how do the villages work in the virtual setting?
So that's really interesting. It's sort of challenging, obviously, like how do you lockpick virtually? So the idea is that we have talks from all the different villages, those we're running, and we haven't published that schedule yet, but those we're running the same day as the conference. And then there's channels in Discord. So if you have a question like, hey, I've got this, lock I've been trying to pick and I'm not having any success, you can have a conversation with someone from Tool and try to figure out if you can actually get it picked or just, learn something. That's if you attended DEF CON, that's sort of how the villages work, right? You have a talk and you also have the Discord channel. So you can have those conversations. And that's the same way we're going to run our conference.
And then the presentations, are there multiple tracks that'll be running simultaneously?
There's 3 tracks. We had a really great turnout for the call for papers. Really well done. We had a content committee so we don't actually make the decisions. The organizing committee doesn't. We actually have a separate committee who reviews everything that comes in. And we picked 3 full tracks. So we start off at 10 with our keynote, and then from 10:30 until 6, there are 3 tracks running concurrently along with all the villages.
Wow, that's a jam-packed day.
It's going to be a very jam-packed day. And as the lead from, I'm on the West Coast. So for me, it's going to be an interesting wake up, get up really early on a Saturday to hang out with a bunch of folks. It'll be fun.
And then the technology behind that, like how do people join? I know that's always like my kind of anxiety level for a virtual conference. I'm like, what is the technology? Is it going to work on my laptop, on that software in that given day, that kind of thing?
Yeah, totally. So we will actually be emailing anybody who's registered access to the Discord server early, and you can pop into the Discord server. On the Discord server, we actually list the GoToWebinar links for each of the talks. So each of the streams have their own link, along with the villages, they have their own link. And some of our sponsors actually have GoToWebinars also running, but all that's in the Discord, and we're here to help you. I spent the first, I would say, like hour of Layer 8 helping people troubleshoot connections to GoToWebinar and Discord, and that's just kind of how it works, and that's fine.
Yeah. My advice, obviously, to the community is get in early, make sure it works. Don't do that. Try not to do that troubleshooting on the day of, right? And many virtual conferences, right, allow you to kind of test that stuff beforehand, right?
Yeah, and the big problem people have with GoToWebinar was just some of like the plugins that people use for, privacy and other type of things. And I get having those, but if you're having trouble, I was just like, can you turn those off or use a very standard web browser? I mean, I know we all have our favorites, but we weren't having any trouble when people were on things like Firefox. But if you're on something sort of obscure, sometimes it doesn't work.
Right. And then I had another. So you mentioned sponsors. How does that work? Because this is the thing with virtual events, obviously, right? Is typically you'd be able to walk up to a sponsor booth, right? In a virtual conference, you can't do that. And so I've seen lots of different models, and actually we've been talking about how we would approach that here at Security Weekly. So I'm curious, like, do sponsors get airtime that the audience gets to go see them present on a topic or chat with them or talk with them?
So it kind of depends on the tier. Like most things, we offer different advantages depending on how much you want to spend. But we do actually have a GoToWebinar channel for our top sponsors, and they're going to let us know if they want to do talks or if they just want to have it open to talk to candidates. They have their own channel in Discord, and then we will include, literature, or we ask for flat items, so things like stickers for the swag bag. So we will send that after the conference to anyone who attends.
So the sponsors will have a GoToWebinar kind of room where they could just chat with folks, right? Basically video conference with the attendees.
Yeah, we're trying that out. I hope it goes well.
No, I think it's a great idea.
We've never done it before.
Yeah, no.
It seems like the right call. People are spending a decent amount, and I know that as you said, it's hard. You don't have that sort of in-person engagement. So we're going to try that out, and hopefully we get some good feedback so we know if that works for future events, especially because none of us really know when we'll go back to in-person. And I think one of the things we've actually learned, at least with Layer 8, was that we like the opportunity to put the things on the web in addition to in-person. So we're already thinking about, if we do go back to in-person, how do we make it hybrid? Just because that way you can reach a larger audience.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Is there anything that's going to be recorded for later viewing and or kind of consumption if you're not able to make like the whole thing?
So we always try, but a lot of it comes down to whether the speaker allows us to. And we won't know that usually until the day of. Like we allow speakers to tell us before we get started, do you want this recorded or not? If they say no, it's not recorded. And so when people ask, you can ask on the channel room, like, is this going to be recorded? But that would be the only way to find out, would be to be there that day and ask, unfortunately.
So if it is recorded, do still people have to register for that, or is there like a certain period of time that has to go by and then it gets posted to YouTube, or like how does that work?
Yeah, we haven't decided yet. There's a huge debate about that, just because, it's a lot of work to put on a conference. But there's also the belief that this should be publicly accessible, especially when you're associated with the B-Sides. So I think we're still just trying to figure out what the best method is, and we'll have more information closer to the event. I think our goal, though, is to eventually, obviously, publish it.
Are there talks that you're particularly excited about, without playing favorites, obviously?
Yeah, I know, it's hard, right? There are, actually. There's a talk by April Wright, which looked really interesting to me. It's about sort of protecting yourself on the web. I think that's kind of important for a lot of us to reverse sort of the OPSEC or even like the OSINT, like reverse that and think about how you protect yourself. That was the one that stood out. I was going through the list. It's been a while since I've looked at them. There's just so many great talks. And as usual, like when I run the conference, I don't actually go to any of the talks. I have to watch them after the fact like everybody else.
Yeah, there is that. Anything else you'd like to share with our audience about BSides Boston?
So we've really been trying to figure out how to make it more interactive, because that was one of the things we've heard from a lot of people. Virtual conferences aren't interactive. They're not fun. They just sit in front of a computer. So we've really been giving some thought to how to make it more interactive and more engaging. And so what we've decided we're going to do, because we had a lot of people donate prizes, is have sort of contests running throughout the day. Like maybe it's a trivia contest, maybe it's solve a small challenge, but we really wanted to make it more interactive, and we'll be doing the same thing in the villages. We're working with them to run their own contests, just so people get a chance to engage with each other. And one of the other conversations that we're having, and we're still trying to figure out how to do, but we may do like some bird of the feather type things during the day if people are interested, just so you can get the opportunity to talk to other people at the conference, right? Because that's the hardest part when we're virtual. We're all talking to each other on Discord, but we don't know we don't know anything about each other.
Yeah. How do you replicate hallway con in a virtual setting, right?
It's hard. Like we all have like our LobbyCon, HallwayCon channels, and they're entertaining. I don't know if you've ever like read some of them, but they can be pretty comical, but it's just not the same experience, and we know that.
Yep. Awesome. Well, we're very excited for BSides Boston, bsidesbos.org. Make sure you go there and register. It's only $10. And I mean, what else are you going to do on a Saturday in September?
And it includes swag. So like,
yeah,
we're not just charging you, we're actually going to send you some stuff afterwards.
Awesome. Lee, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome to stay. I think you said you had to go, but you're more than welcome to stay, and we're going to talk about the security news.
Nope, I've got to actually run, but I really appreciate it, and I hope to see everybody at BSides. If you want to say hi to me, my Discord alias is Leisures, so feel free to say hi directly to me and say that you saw me on the show. Happy to chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Lee.
All right, thanks, everybody.
All righty. Let's see. Let's dive into the stories. What do you say?
Yes.
Where do you want to start?
Whew.
There's some
like last week,
heavy content.
Like last week in prep, and the week before I was struggling, but like this week was. Oof.
There's some heavy stuff out there.
Yeah.
I suppose we can start with the not so technical stuff.
In my defense, I added one story while we were talking that I thought was pretty fascinating too.
I wanted to start with the legality of security research to be decided in the U.S. Supreme Court case. So the way I understand this is there's a case of a law enforcement officer that looked up a license plate number but was not authorized to do so and took money for that. And so he was being charged with, CFAA violation, which is where it kind of gets into the research aspect. The other charge was kind of interesting too. I forget what that was. I'm trying to look it up here. Violation of wire fraud, basically, right? Because they took money to do an illegal lookup of a license plate number that fell outside of the scope of his role at law enforcement. But the second charge of violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for accessing state and government database to look up a license plate in exchange for money. And so it's interesting, Casey Ellis from Bugcrowd, who really needs to get on the. Casey and I have been talking, just not on the show, and we need to fix that. But he says, with the appeal accepted by the U.S. Supreme Court, security researchers and technology companies are concerned with the potential for the case to turn independent vulnerability research into unauthorized access, thus a prosecutable offense if the Supreme Court rules that Van Buren's actions are in violation of CFAA. It will undermine software and cloud security, according to Casey, which is kind of interesting.
They only, every time this comes up a lot, right? Like, every time this comes up, I don't think people fully realize the ramifications and, the detriment that, there's two sides to the argument, right? But at the end of the day, this doesn't help any of the insecure software, and this doesn't help any of the vendors through this. The attackers are still going to do this. Malicious people are still going to do it. It just forces the people that have to follow the law to not have the liberty to do this at will.
Yeah, I don't know. We really need an attorney to weigh in on this.
We should get Jenna on the show. She would love to. She would love to.
We do have. John Snyder. Calling John Snyder.
That was loud, Johnny.
Hey, where's our phone friend?
Perhaps on Security and Compliance Weekly, or maybe a separate segment. But we should get John to weigh in on this one, because my question for our attorney friends would be: is how well does the argument hold up to be charged with the CFAA to basically for what this crime was, right? Is that really?
If you're serious, it would be fun to get a panel of lawyers from our friends on and have the discussion. I don't know if they would innately be able to take sides, or if they're all of the same mind. But I would like to see a dialogue that's evaluating sort of both sides of the argument, but from a legal perspective. I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, and Paul, one thing, the way you spoke about it struck me, and I don't know whether that's the wording in any of the legal case, or you name it, or was your wording or paraphrasing, but you said they were charging him with violating the CFAA for accessing government computer systems, looking up that license plate in exchange for money. But isn't that his day job? Like, if you're a cop and you access these systems to look these up, you are doing that while you are getting paid by the state.
Yeah, you're
looking at stuff, and you're looking up that stuff in exchange for money. It's because it's your job.
Right.
Yeah,
it's true.
Might be the doing it for money part.
But if you're doing it for your day job, you're doing it for money. Like, I'm sure he doesn't go to work for free.
But that's where the unauthorized. Well, the unauthorized. Well, I mean, but
he's authorized, right? He has an account. He's allowed to.
So as an employee, you're breaking the employee agreement. You're obviously not doing good employee stuff. To take it as far, that's setting a bad precedence with CFAA and what that can be used for.
Yeah.
It has a purpose, and lawyers are going to argue and prove one side or the other. That's what lawyers do. That's their
lawyer's
thing.
going to lawyer.
Yeah, outside of that, what ramifications does it have that we don't actually see, and how does that play into things like breaking into EULA, or tearing apart and modifying your laptop, or even doing pen testing against a device that you're not authorized but you're using for an engagement.
Or how about this? If it was a federal computer system and a government employee, and the person paying was from another nation state, it would be espionage, not necessarily a CFAA violation, right?
Yeah. So
This could go all the way down to worse than that. Like you could end up with people being charged with terrorist acts now, and putting this under CFAA with some kind of a terrorist and abuse act. Like that's not great.
It all comes down, I think, to splitting hairs, which is what the legal system is all about. Splitting hairs. There's like the laws are outdated to what the technology has become. In a lot of cases, or how we've chosen to implement government, it really comes down to how you want to interpret it and how you want to split those hairs.
But I come back to your point, Larry, and the more I think about it, it's extremely valid, is that the crime wasn't necessarily the unlawful access to the computer system, because this person did have that access. It was what they did with the data afterwards. They basically sold it after the fact. To me, that's the crime, not accessing the computer system. If the person didn't have access to this and got in by some other means, that would be unauthorized access, and that I can see.
They were authorized, but I think it more becomes about the theft of the data and how they did it afterwards. I mean, you're doing it for money as part of your day job, but you're not stealing it to go profit for it a second time.
Share it with.
Yeah.
In the early days when I was first getting into this, when I was still working for that DoD organization, the only law there was on the books that was remotely close to applying was this Wire Fraud Act, which goes back to like the 30s or something like that. But I remember there was a train of thought back then that people, back then it was all, shell access, dial-ups, pop accounts, and you drop into a shell. And one of the recommendations early on is put some sort of banner on saying, use of this system is by authorized individuals only. But there was a train of thought of people that said, well, don't do that, because that implies that we've got some sort of protections or controls in place, but really we don't. If we don't have it there, it's sort of open access. I forget some of the minutia, but the argument was basically, let's leave ourselves open. I think it relates to what Larry was saying, that it's not the breaking in, or back in those days even more. It was just using the features that were available, and it was what you did once you got there. And if data exfiltration, which is where things started to go to wonky.
Yeah, and Jeff, I remember even some of those conversations about some of those banners and type of stuff way back when I started, was like, never include the word welcome in your banner, because that means you're inviting them.
Right.
Yeah, welcome to our Unix
shirt out of that kind of thing. Right.
I remember going back and forth with attorneys and people who were supposedly in the know on banners. Oh man, there was just like this huge back and forth. It was like, oh my God, you can't say this, you can't say that. It's like, what can you say? Just the facts, man. Just the facts. It's illegal to bust this thing. So, what the hell am I talking about? Back to you guys.
Well, according to FireEye, there are more attackers using zero-day exploits. This is database from 2019, actually. And they also state that since about 2017, we've been substantially diversified, and they say this is partially due to the role of vendors offering offensive cyber threat capabilities. They include examples such as Hacking Team, NSO Group, and Gamma International, which firms have been observed selling cyber espionage and intrusion software and services, including zero-day exploits, to governments and other entities for several years, and attributing that to the uptick based on FireEye's study that in 2019 there were more zero-day exploits used in attacks than previous years. Do we buy into this?
I'm curious if the correlation to that is, I would take it in two ways. One, systems are getting more secure, like Windows is a harder target. There are a lot more security aspects you have to think about, and getting that like initial access takes a little more effort. But two, you also have a much more remote and kind of decentralized remote workforce. And thus, that means the access and ability to utilize those 0 days becomes much more critical, and you have to have different ways in, and you have to have more. There's more research being done against those particular applications that are going to be being used outside of kind of a corporate firewall or corporate protection. So I think that's kind of a twofold thing.
Ty, I think you hit on a good point, is that as it becomes more difficult to exploit systems, it means that when you find a vulnerability that you can exploit, you're not telling the vendor. right? That's basically what it's boiling down to. So we've created the market for zero-day exploits has been flourishing because the protections in Windows are better, right?
You're not relying on like a macro. You're not relying on a password spray or credential harvesting. You're actually relying on the ability to gain remote code execution via something that's on someone's box. That's a much harder thing to do. You've got to plan out. You got to social engineer. It's a much more difficult campaign to do it the other way.
It's potentially. Is it noisier, right, to do the password spraying and social engineering? I think it's noisier.
Yeah, there's protections. There's good controls to see that
definitely.
now, and yeah, there's a lot. It's a lot less frequent to get in that way. And again, if they have half decent maturity and half decent protections, you're not just going to send in a macro. You're not just going to send in a payload. Like those things are just going to get caught, by the default spam filter now. So it takes a little bit more effort to do that and to do that right.
Look, I think it all roots back to Stuxnet. I'll be honest, right? I mean, what happened with Stuxnet is it blew open the door. It totally opened the door for the market to develop internationally on cyber warfare. That door was closed before, but once that thing became public and it hit the streets, it was open season. And I think we've seen, a decade plus of development, and now we're seeing the fruits of that actually, become and emerge into the marketplace. And
Joff, you've had the awakening of reading Kim Zetter's Countdown to Zero Day, haven't you? Did you finish that book?
I have finished that book, and boy, that
isn't it
like
awesome?
If there's one book I believe that every cybersecurity professional should read, that is the book. The other one would be the Phoenix Project, of course, but that is the book.
And I was going to put the Cuckoo's Egg in there somewhere.
Cuckoo's Egg is definitely in there too.
That's my current read.
Egg, I actually haven't read, believe it or not, but
it's on Audible, Joff. It's on Audible now.
Yeah, you should definitely do
It's also a Nova special because if it's good enough, they'll make a movie out of it.
Right.
And Cliff Stahl played himself.
Oh,
really? I didn't know that, Jeff. And I'm gonna have to go find that. That's
Yeah, you can find it on YouTube.
Gotta check it out then.
Anyway, back to Stuxnet. I agree because basically the world watched. I mean, let's be frank. The U.S. and Israel use air quotes cyber weapons. In the book goes into great detail as to how those were used. There were zero-day exploits used in there, and basically once that cat was out of the bag, it was like, well, I mean, if the U.S. and Israel can do it, like, yeah, your gloves are off. We're going to do this behind the scenes.
Exactly.
And we're going to. It's still happening today. It's just now there's not a book about what the new exploits are that are happening. But I think this article we're talking about is basically underscoring the fact that it's still happening today.
It's a point that
if the market is maturing,
right?
The market is maturing. It's entering. That's been a decade in development. This natural evolution, and is a thing. I don't know. It's in the days, I suppose.
What happened to Joff's? Yeah. What happened to your internet
connection? Too much ponage, man.
You're too far in space right now.
Up there. Now this plays into one of the things that we talked about last week on the stories, though, is like as an organization, like you really, if you're going to be doing this and getting some like secure maturity roadmap set up, you really do need to have a bug bounty program, or you do need to make sure that you are paying for and have a good responsible disclosure avenue for attackers. Otherwise, what's the incentive to bring that to you other than getting in trouble? And if I can sell it and monetize that, and that seems like an easier route than whatever route you're providing for a legal, way to do that, then yeah, you really need to make sure that those things are set up because it's easy to sell those now.
It really kind of, I mean, going back to the first segment on the show, making me want Roy's product more and more, right? And at the end, Roy was not commenting. I'm like, so hold on, wait a minute. That means you could be sitting on a whole pile of 0 days. And he was like, I'm not answering that on air. I'm like, but that's pretty. You think about that. That's pretty cool.
I mean, how do they don't need VC funding,
right? Yeah. Now they have their own market, right? We're speculating. We're not saying that they're doing that, but yep. Let's go down the exploit path because we just got some really fun stuff to talk about. So Cisco. Now I didn't know people were still using Jabber. Apparently that's a thing. Is Jabber still a thing? Are we doing Jabber?
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of interesting because my story number 2 was some stuff from Dancho Danchev, who's apparently coming back.
Still a thing, or a thing again now.
Or a thing again. And his thing was he's profiling a currently active portfolio of high-profile cybercriminal Jabber and XMPP accounts. Now.
Still a thing. I thought we all moved to Slack and then we moved to Discord, but in any case,
I mean, Jabber was secure, right?
Supposedly,
right?
I feel like I don't remember as much Jabber as I should remember. Did we use that?
Yeah,
we did.
Ocean.
Was Google Hangouts or what was it? What was the Google chat?
OTR, the Pigeon and OTR.
Pigeon. Yeah, it was
OTR,
Pigeon. Was that was Jabber, right?
Yes. Pigeon had support for Jabber.
Had support for Jabber, right. So anyway, Cisco has a Jabber client, apparently, for Windows. Now, discussions about what chat protocol you're using aside, the flaw can be exploited remotely without authentication, sending a specially crafted extensible messaging and presence protocol, XMPP, message to a vulnerable application. The issue exists because software fails to properly validate message contents. When you dig into, and I highly recommend folks go to wiki.securityweekly.com. This is episode number 666, Mark of the Beast. In there is a link to the original research, and in there, what you realize is this is a cross-site scripting attack that has remote code execution. Just like let that rattle around your brain for a minute. Because when it does, you're going to be like, I got to go read this for myself. And when you see it, you're going to be like, oh, that's what we're talking. And now, what was interesting is the CVSS score was calculated properly, right? Because how do you calculate? It's cross-site scripting, but there's remote code execution, right? You don't want to lean towards the cross-site scripting side in your calculation.
You multiply it.
Yeah, you want a 9.9 is what this one got. Yeah, so this is... Interesting.
And for the record, we go back a couple of years now, but XMPP was the protocol behind the teledildonics hacking that Don Weber and I did.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just a chat; it's a general communications protocol.
So in this case, it was used for chat because you'd have the remote teledildonics device, and you could chat with your partner and send commands to the love machine, as it were.
The love machine.
You could send remote commands to the marital aid, to use the good term, I guess. And those commands were delivered in that chat window over XMPP.
Interesting.
And we deciphered what those commands were, and in fact could send commands that were greater than.
Yeah, it's a very easily decipherable protocol. Yeah, when you read the article, it's very good.
Yep.
I was
especially when it's not implemented with any security, with any encryption.
Yeah, basically, you send some JavaScript over XMPP, and you can execute any binary that's executable that's on the system itself. Is one of the features. Because then it becomes... It's a feature. I mean, this is a feature.
The application that's processing that XMPP message, how do they process the data? It's untrusted data, effectively. And that was some of the things that that Don and I did is the settings for vibrate went from 1 to 10 and we sent 12 type of thing. The biggest one is that we did that outside of the normal application. So you didn't need, maybe in this case, the Cisco
No, you don't.
client.
You just send a HTTP. It's basically an HTTP, a post request.
Yep.
Because the XMPP is basically,
we used a third-party client for that, and even added people to our chat that we shouldn't have been able to add, like the president and founder of the company.
Yeah, it's in the
I think what Larry's
animations.
telling me is he used XMPP over HTTP to send a number 12 dildo?
Pretty much
to a fake PB. On animation start, window.call CPP function open file. And they, of course, calc.exe is what they open, and it starts calc.exe. So yeah, definitely something to look at.
Yeah, you know what? I find that so amusing because every time I'm testing my own malware, I'm always popping calc, right?
Yeah,
and it's kind of
it's always there. Place. It's always there. No one removes it.
So it's funny. Sometimes I forget, what systems on my VMs that I've infected, and I'll crank them, and the calc pops. I was like, wow, how convenient. A calculator popped. Right? I just pwned myself. I quack myself up with my own pwnage.
Oh my God. Wow. Just some awesome technical articles. Let's just hit them somewhat quickly. So, watch speculative memory probing bypass kernel defenses give malware root control. So this was a research paper. It's really deep technical research paper, and I linked to the original research in the show notes. But basically, it is summarized as this.
Yeah.
Bear with me now.
Yeah.
Using speculative execution for crash suppression allows the elevation of basic memory write vulnerabilities into powerful speculative probing primitives that leak through microarchitectural side effects. Such primitives can be repeatedly probe victim memory and break strong randomization schemes without crashes and bypass all deployed mitigations against Spectre-like attacks. What I garnered from this, and I read some of the research paper, is that basically you can get on a system and try to execute things and find ways to execute code without crashing it by using the Spectre kind of speculative execution, which is aimed at preventing crashes. So you're using that feature to basically like fuzz to find where you can execute code and bypass ASLR. Awesome research paper.
And in those sentences, I found a whole bunch of buzzword bingo terms.
Oh, big time buzzword.
For example, speculative execution, crash suppression, speculative probing primitives, and microarchitectural side effects.
Yes.
So drink, and drink.
Very cool. It's very, very, very cool stuff. Tyler, Jeff, did you guys read this article yet, or?
No, I'm not going to. It makes my brain hurt.
This one will make your brain hurt. Yes.
Yeah.
I love reading articles like that. Are you kidding me? I'm in.
You should.
I haven't read it yet.
Read and report back.
I mean, the fact that you're chaining stuff from the Spectre stuff is that in and of itself. Like I feel like that's still an underutilized and underpublicized, kind of just disappeared from the level of technical effort that took and like what you could gain from it. If they're like starting to chain this together, that is very interesting.
Yeah, it was more like they're using the speculative execution features that prevent the system from crashing to be able to find ways to execute code and kind of fuzz without crashing the system, which is kind of I thought.
So you anticipate this is a vulnerability or a misconfiguration issue?
It's a good question, Jeff. It's a good question. It's more like a design flaw,
or how do you fix it?
I was going to say design abuse.
Weaponization of a utility.
I didn't get that far in the paper for their recommendations on how this would actually be fixed.
So
I don't know how
it kind of falls, but it kind of falls in the class of some of the other vulnerabilities we see with process stuff, right? Because when you get to the point manipulating individual bits to cause some weird behavior through some sort of adjacent memory thing or whatever it might be, it's technically elite. It's freaking awesome, but practically most of the time it becomes nearly impossible, right? And so the question with a lot of these is, okay, the paper might be awesome, but how much real practical impact does it have, right?
Agreed. And sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does, and it's difficult to predict, pun intended,
right?
Whether it's going to be a practical attack or not, right? And how widespread that could be.
It's kind of like
this is
bang for buck kind of argument.
Yeah.
So it's how much effort you're going to have to put in, really.
But I mean, if you are leveraging one of those like 0 days, and one of the only things keeping you from pushing that to a larger attack surface is something like kernel ASLR, or you got to figure out a way to bypass like XOM, one of those like kernel level things, and this is now a new feature that will get you to that point, and you've spent some money on a 0 day. Like, yeah, then you're chaining this together, and that's a clear use case. But again, when we're typically doing this, you're abusing some kind of a feature in like O365 or SaaS applications or bad passwords, right? So much lower level of effort, and this would be something that you would save for, like, I would say, a nation state attack or something that you're very specifically designing for an engagement or a client.
And it's interesting, the Chrome sandbox escape is also another exploit chain where they're chaining multiple exploits together. And I didn't get into deep into this article about like how the actual exploitation and execution is actually triggered. What I was kind of enamored with in this article is how the Chromium engine is structured, because there is a rendering process and a browser process. So the browser process is what interacts with the operating system. The rendering process is what allows you to have multiple tabs open, is rendering all of the JavaScript and HTML and all of those elements. And if something goes wrong in that process, the rendering process can crash, but your browser still stays alive. This is why like a tab can cause problems, and it's in a sandbox, and that's all right. You can close the tab or whatever, and the rendering process can crash, but the browser itself doesn't crash, which I thought was interesting. And the Mojo IPC connection is what I think what allows the rendering process to talk to the browser process, or the browser process to talk to the operating system. But there's inter-process communications between the renderer, the browser, and then the operating system. So now knowing all of that, which this article does a fantastic job of describing. The original post is actually from a Google blog post as to how they discovered and mitigated this vulnerability, which goes in even deeper into technical details if you want to get super nerdy.
Yeah, the Google Project Zero stuff is like,
oh my
super
god,
nerdy.
That blog post is awesome. This post from Medium, and I should probably call out who actually wrote this post, because Adam Jordan did a great job writing this post. Describes the sandbox bypass is made possible because of an out-of-bound read and write bug in the renderer process, chained with a use after free bug in the browser process, triggered via the Mojo IPC connection.
Doesn't it always come down to complexity is the enemy of good security?
Yes. But it's interesting. They introduce...
So you agree with me, Jeff?
I can agree and disagree with you at the same sentence. I can express multiple simultaneous attitudes in the same paragraph, as Spock said in one of the Star Trek.
Joff can be the rendering and the browser process in one, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
I find some of these browser vulnerabilities to be fascinating. We did a great interview with because the JavaScript. So what I kind of pieced together, interviewing some folks from when we did our Black Hat interviews, right, is that now I understand that inside of the rendering process, there's multiple processes inside of there. One of those is the JavaScript interpreter inside of the rendering process, which then lives inside of the browser process. And it's super interesting.
And you have different policies and stuff that those particular processes or functions can actually call and communicate in between. So those policies is usually where there's some kind of a bug. If you look at any of the updates, it's always in like one of the policies or the file write calls, or sometimes it's some of the internal memory file write impersonations. But the overall, like the way that we're seeing a lot of the kind of Chromium and browsers, they're having to be very, very security conscious, because we're doing more and more in the browser. And I think there's a lot to be said about where browser security is and what we trust in the browser. Along with that comes kind of there's going to be more and more potential execution and abuse there. People are going to be looking at stuff because that's where a lot of the C2, that's where a lot of persistence, that's where a lot of getting stuff to work, I think, is going to happen. Like JavaScript is where a lot of our code has had to go. You got a lot of .NET to JavaScript. You've got a lot of JavaScript in like Outlook homepage attacks. You've got a bunch of stuff that renders JavaScript, and that's where really execution will have to stay on a lot of these OSs as it gets more difficult.
And the other great thing that he describes is the combination of the interpreter and compiled code as well, and the just-in-time compiler for JavaScript in the version 8 JavaScript engine that's implemented in Chrome, and that leads to some of the abuses for one of the bounds checking vulnerabilities. Awesome.
Yeah, this article is fantastic. From like
Awesome
they
stuff.
covered a ton of stuff that is really hard to look up
Yes.
and
Agreed.
understand at a high level.
My favorite part, Google Project Zero is attacking Google's browser.
Yeah, isn't that right?
Like, that's-
I was, and it's funny you say that, Larry. I was looking for
No
like
holds barred, right?
a credit to a researcher or third party. No, this was internal to Google. I thought that was really cool too. Yeah, very astute of you to see that as well.
In 2017, this was also the same group of folks that discovered the massive Broadcom Wi-Fi bug that led to remote code execution on Apple devices, on iOS devices, chaining 3 layers of exploits deep.
Right. There was a the other interesting one. This one's just kind of funny, and one of the reasons I added is because I have one of these Mo5 routers. Johnny, our production engineer, knows we use it when we go to conferences. Basically, it's a 4G also Wi-Fi router. We use it at conferences because we can stick a SIM card in it, and then we can put big honking antennas on it, and we can put it up on like a window, like suction cup it to a window, or put it somewhere high up, and get really good internet speeds over 4G to upload our videos. And I noticed that the firmware on it was really I want to say this was the one that I believe was running OpenWRT, but that could have been the other device that we use at conferences as well. But I want to say the MoFi, at least the version we had, was OpenWRT under the covers, some customization of OpenWrt. However, when you read the researcher's description of the bug in MoFi routers, it says the authentication function contains undocumented code which provides the ability to authenticate as root without having to know the actual root password. An adversary with the private key can remotely authenticate to the management interfaces as root, right? Now, they also say that technical details are not included because the vendor has not released a patch. So let's break this down. We know that the user is root that I need to authenticate as. We know that the private key can remotely authenticate to the management interface as root. So now we know where the password or the other part of the authentication comes from is the private key. My bet is that if you start reverse engineering this firmware, it's the same private key that's used in all of the firmware. So if you reverse engineer this firmware, you pull that private key,
you can authenticate to all the devices.
you can authenticate as root to all of these devices. That alone, while
Firing up strings.
that's enough technical details for most of us to probably derive the exploit for this vulnerability. I'm not saying that you should use this without permission, because that's not what we advocate here. You should have permission to do this. But what I'm saying is that the good people are not the only ones reading this. The bad people are reading this too. And if you have one of these routers, it should be like ours and off inside of a travel case until such time we can power it up and upgrade the firmware. Once
Can we get that powered up, Johnny?
Yeah, we can,
Tyler, what is that?
We can do that.
Cat firmware pipe to grep for dash space capital begin.
Yep. Capital EB, capital EL.
Yeah, there's absolutely ways to look for a key.
Sure.
Yep. In fact, that might even be built into bin. I want to say that might even be built into Binwalk or something.
Binwalk looking for entropy.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So I thought that was interesting. CVE 2020-15836. Unauthenticated command injection. Yes.
What else we got?
Fun with exploits. The other one that I thought was really interesting, Team TNT gains full remote takeover of cloud instances. So this is a variation on an attack. So basically, you make the mistake that we did a few years ago, and you rush to implement something in the cloud and realize that your Docker API unauthenticated is exposed to the internet. We learned this the hard way. Thankfully, we were able to minimize the damages. We talked about it on the show when it happened. We were fortunate that whoever found this was probably an automated script that was launching DDoS attacks. So we got a CloudWatch email and shut it down right away, and then did the forensics and was like, oh, they uploaded a container. Basically, if your Docker API port's exposed, you can upload containers. What this looks like today is very interesting because the attackers are using Weave Scope, which is a powerful utility giving the attackers access to all information about the victim's server environment with the ability to control including installed applications, connections between cloud workloads, the use of memory and CPU, a list of existing containers with the ability to start, stop, and open interactive shells on any of those containers. This is a legitimate tool, Weave Scope. The attackers reap all of the benefits as if they had installed a backdoor on the server. So they're basically poisoning images in Docker Hub with the hopes that you'll install those in your environment, and then those images have the backdoor. They install Weave Scope and enumerate your entire environment, and can basically take over your cloud instance.
See, Paul, you weren't crazy.
I wasn't.
Yeah.
I was going to say, didn't we just talk about this tonight? I mean, come on.
Right. Right.
This is exactly what we were talking about.
So I was gonna have
configuration. This is configuration.
I was having a hard time grokking this one because I didn't get initially that was it Weave Scope. It was a legitimate tool.
Yep.
I thought that was the name of the rat, which it is a rat.
It's a legitimate rat.
Legitimate rat. And I couldn't. And I was trying to figure out, were they gaining access to Weave Scope already installed or no? To me, it sounds like they're using the exposed Docker API to install Weave Scope.
Correct.
Where it wasn't.
Yep.
Normally installed.
Yeah. So Weave Scope says it automatically detects processes, containers, and hosts.
Yeah. This is one of those things where people don't realize like what the hybrid kind of cloud ramifications are, and doing the federation between your internal and external. Like if you don't get that cloud right, just like your inside, this can have ramifications to the internal network as well. And the talk about the credential stealing worm within AWS that can propagate into your internal network via that, like that sounds like a really bad day in a lot of people's world.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's basically lateral movement in the cloud. I mean, that sounds really buzzwordy, right?
But it's almost
like cloud hopping?
It's like cloud hopping. That's a very good term for it.
It is cloud hopping, yeah.
Jeff?
I should
Jeff, are you going to coin that?
Yeah. Someone register cloud hopping.
Larry,
get a domain. Let's get a domain going. Cloudhopping.com.
It's probably already taken.
Evil cloud hopping. Malicious cloud hopping.
I've done. I'm done with collecting domains because it's becoming too expensive. I haven't.
Cloudhopping.com is taken.
It's never stopped, Larry.
Hopping.cloud is available though.
Hopping.cloud.
Ooh, there you go.
That's a nice one.
Yeah, Larry and I were in a race there doing domain collection for a while. It was bad. It was really bad.
Yep. Hey, I got Enter John's mom before you did.
That's just not right.
It's just so wrong. Larry, tell us about the Bluetooth bug. Oh, what is this dubbed?
Bluetooth.
You had just started Bluetooth.
Bluetooth.
You had just started looking into this.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's not in the courseware already. Oh wait, it just dropped today.
It dropped today, and I was sharing that with James Leave It All, and he's like, "God damn it."
Got to do a course update now.
Wait, we just turned one in. Like I teach it for the first time in 2 weeks. It's like, God damn it! But this becomes off the record conversation as part of the class. Like, hey, check this out.
You got to make it like an appendix for the students.
Yeah. This is the new stuff that that we talk about that doesn't necessarily make it in the course for a little bit. But this one was interesting, specifically in that it's an attack against Bluetooth 4 and Bluetooth 5. Largely resolved in Bluetooth 5.1. It didn't specify whether it was resolved in Bluetooth 4. Leveraging Bluetooth 4 and 5 to recover the LTKs, the long-term keys, by manipulating the algorithm in which those keys are determined using CTKD. They didn't release the mathematical
cross-transport key derivation.
Derivation, yep. So they didn't release
I
the
only
methods.
say that because it was on my screen.
They they didn't release the methods for how they manipulated CTKD to recover those keys. But once they have those keys, they were then able to intercept and do all sorts of fun stuff against Bluetooth 4 and Bluetooth 5 traffic. But what they also found was that devices that supported and I think it was a requirement that supported Bluetooth basic rate and extended data rate, Bluetooth Classic, and Bluetooth 4 and or Bluetooth 5 at the same time, typically that the keys were the same. The LTKs were the same if both functions used CTKD. So you attack Bluetooth 4 to recover the keys to now man in the middle and intercept Bluetooth Classic traffic.
Interesting.
And Bluetooth Classic traffic is incredibly hard to do. Bluetooth 4, Bluetooth 5, not so much.
Yeah. Classic was a pain in the neck.
Still
right?
is. Still is.
Yeah.
Is that because it did more frequency hopping?
Right. We hope it's kind of gone away, but but it hasn't, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, but the channel hopping stuff and the fact that there was no way to actually predict feasibly was painful.
The problem is you could predict. So Bluetooth Classic channel hop 1,600 times a second on 80 different channels. Sorry, 79 different channels.
Wait, is that?
That's Classic.
But wasn't there
It's Classic.
a woman that developed the standard
Hedy Lamarr. Frequency hopping spread spectrum.
Yep. And that's basically implemented in Bluetooth.
It's frequency hopping spread spectrum. Yep. You have a spectrum. You hop between a frequency in those with a pattern. The pattern is predictable, but the pattern is based on a unique MAC address, a BD adder for those Bluetooth devices. And every Bluetooth device has a unique address. And when you join the network, they synchronize and they pick one to synchronize their
traffic. And that's what they use to base on.
And the only time
the
only time you can to determine the BD adder, it's not like Wi-Fi or Ethernet that MAC address is broadcast all the time. It's only broadcast when you're in discoverable mode.
When you're pairing.
When you're
or in discoverable
mode, which nowadays is significantly more limited as to when you're in discoverable mode.
The user has to put it in discoverable mode.
Usually they're
most of the time.
Usually you go into the Bluetooth settings on your device and it says it's now in discoverable mode.
I gotcha. And your phone, right? When
on your laptop, and it's usually off.
But on a device, like on my mouse, when I did that, I had to hold the button to the side for 5 seconds. And then
to trigger discoverable mode. Now, Bluetooth Low Energy, on the other hand, the channel hopping is predictable.
Oh, interesting. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes,
that's interesting.
It's they reduced the number of channels that they use for frequency hopping spread spectrum by half. The channel hopping pattern is predictable, and instead of doing this whole discoverable mode, here I am at this time, there's 3 channels out of that half that is devoted to saying, "Hey, I'm here." There's a beacon channel. There are 3 beacon channels.
It's much more predictable.
Yeah, three beacon channels, and then it's mod 37 from there. So if you see something beaconing, it will hop mod 37, and you can predict where that next channel
where it's going to hop. Yep.
Because the beaconing is included in that hopping pattern, and it's predictable.
Interesting.
Yep.
And why'd they do that in Bluetooth Low Energy? Because it's smaller, lower powered devices.
Smaller, lower power, less resources.
Yeah.
Easier to implement.
They didn't want to eat batteries and stuff, right? They had to have something that was much more predictable. Instead of the pseudo random stuff.
And then for the other stuff too, that it becomes terrifying in that the concept of pairing doesn't really exist in application, in usability in Bluetooth Low Energy. Typically what happens when you pair your Bluetooth Low Energy devices, it's called just works, and it uses a default key of 6 zeros because you don't retain long-term keys when you connect the devices. Hey, my mouse wants to send some commands to my computer, and then it disconnects because you don't touch it for a while. Those keys go away. You move the mouse, 0, 0, 0, does it. With bonding, what they referenced in the article as bonding in Bluetooth Low Energy is what you would see as pairing in Bluetooth Classic.
Interesting.
Where you put the keys, you store them on the device.
I feel like we're bonding right now, actually.
We are. I mean, if you want more in depth, you should really
like pairing to me.
Yeah, that too.
If you want more in depth, you should really come take SANS Sec 617 exploiting wireless and ethical hacking.
You should,
because we spend a lot of time on this.
What
I know, right?
We literally teed that up for you, Larry.
I know.
But having said, when I saw this article, I'm like, Larry, this is all you, dude. Like, And I don't know if you had actually like seen it because it's like literally just broke.
You sent it to me, and I'm like, "Have you seen this?" I'm like, "Nope," but I'm on it because I know what I'm doing for the next 2 hours.
It's awesome.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Hey, I effectively had one measly story. Can we talk about it?
I thought you had two.
I was just going there.
Well,
Jeff,
I added the second one later. But we don't need to bring up that one.
I see how it is, Jeff.
General Keith Alexander.
Yeah.
I want to say was it in Countdown? No, it was in a different book that I was reading that talked about went into actually some detail as to the changes in influence that General Keith Alexander had when he was the head of the NSA. Correct? Director. Thank you, director of the NSA. I knew I did something wrong when I said that. Director of the NSA. In basically forming, was it Keith Alexander that formed the first TAO?
I believe so.
Was that
it was
Sandworm?
after my time.
Was that Sandworm?
It might have been Sandworm,
I think it was Sandworm
that was talking about that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But so this made the news on the little NSA alumni mailing list that I'm on, and of course somebody also responded, and I posted it on the Discord server that Snowden tweeted about it, saying, "It turns out, hey Alexa is short for Hey Keith Alexander."
Yeah, interesting. That's a stretch. Yep. So Keith Alexander is now on Amazon's board.
Yes. So the news is he's joined Amazon's board, which is an interesting post DoD. Everything he did at NSA that we're struggling to determine exactly what it was, and now he's over at Amazon, which I've been thinking lately, and this sort of relates, but the last week or two I've been thinking, the future of the world may not be countries and nation states. It may end up being several large companies like the Amazons and the Googles and the Facebooks.
I agree,
because
Jeff.
when I was at Amazon,
I think we're already there. I agree.
When I was at Amazon last October, and I was speaking at their first annual, might be their only annual crypto conference, and there was a room full of 200 people that was part of their job. It's like, I have not been around this many crypto people since being at NSA, and it occurred to me, and I was talking to them about, just how big is Amazon, and their revenues rival many, they're like in the, high 10s or 20s in terms of, being similar in size to many countries. Mm-hmm. So yes, they very much are all the way already there. Mm-hmm.
And if you take their earnings out of our GDP, where does that leave us?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I think that's an astute observation, Jeff, that the future world is more going to be multinational nations than it is country boundaries. And countries' boundaries evolve over time. So we're an interesting time.
But it's like so much science fiction works becoming reality, right? I mean, there's so many great science fiction works that predict the basically global corporations controlling certain aspects of what's happening in those storylines, right?
Yep.
Forget the one that
it's a mix of science fiction, dystopian novels, and maybe a few other themes thrown in there. But I lost my thought. Never mind.
I forget what it was that the book that I read that was along those lines.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say while you're looking.
Yeah, go for it.
It's not that corporations and very, very powerful rich men, primarily at least in U.S. history, have not run the show effectively, and certainly probably in the last however many years, the whole lobbying is one element, or super PACs in terms of the election cycle. It's like hiding it, money laundering all the influence that comes from individuals and corporations, which is where all the money is. It's like all that's going to go away, and it's just the large companies, these huge organizations that are just going to hold sway and kind of run the show. And
so a book recommendation along these lines is called All Systems Red, like the color, Martha Wells. It tackles the questions of ethics of sentient robotics. The main character is a deadly security droid that has bucked its restrictive programming and is balanced between contemptive self-discovery and an idle instinct to kill humans, but also touches upon that these basically sentient robotic, they're part organic and part robot, right? They're all created by a central corporation, and it includes aspects of like the red tape and mistakes and stuff that would happen in corporations, except this corporation was responsible for creating these beings and sending humans to these different planets with these robots to protect them and all this stuff. It was a fantastic book, kind of outside the scope of the books that we've previously recommended that are very much in line with information security and hacking. I thought this was a really, really, really good book. Highly recommended. All Systems Red.
Well, maybe when we're living in that future, hacking aren't the bad guys, but they're the rebels and the heroes,
right?
So, we can write the new narrative.
Are we there yet?
Along those lines of Paul's book recommendations, if you want to go for a total, pardon my French, a total mindfuck, go.
I knew that's what you were going to say.
Go watch Ex Machina. Then watch Her.
Yes.
In that order.
And maybe Westworld. So it says for fans of Westworld, Ex Machina. Also, if you watch those, they say read this book, All Systems Red. Yes. It's funny you mentioned that.
Nice.
Yeah.
But and that was a recommendation from Josh Wright.
Yes.
He said he watched those two movies in that order, and his mind was blown.
Totally. I've seen both those movies as well. I haven't gotten through Westworld. I started it, and then I never got back to it.
Okay, the original from the 70s with Yul Brynner?
No, the newer one that was on HBO, Showtime. Or
Joff?
So I was just going to say, I missed that. So say which two movies do we have to watch in sequence?
Ex Machina, and then Her, Her.
Okay, gotcha.
Gotta go watch some movies.
Yeah, got some movies to watch.
Wait, who is the voice in Her? It's what's her name? It's
Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, Scarlett Johansson. Thank you. I was going to say it's Black Widow. Yeah, is the voice of Her, which you don't get to actually see Scarlett Johansson in that movie, but she's the voice of the.
I don't need to see her. I think that's kind of the point, right?
It is
the whole movie. That's kind of the point. Yep.
So just go watch those movies. Tyler, stories.
I think
you got six. You got six up there. We have to at least talk about one or two.
Here comes the bus.
I mean, so the Firebase cloud messaging was kind of interesting, like using push notifications to kind of take over servers and send out notifications. There was a pretty big bounty handed out on that one. The Biden campaign getting hammered. That's we all kind of predicted that. We knew this was going to happen. That's been in the works, but we're seeing a substantial amount of activity from APT groups against pretty much all of the candidates right now at a level that is increasing exponentially. So I think this will be more and more interesting.
That's kind of interesting. If the hacking is pretty balanced against all political candidates, does it just cancel each other out?
Yeah, I mean, so you got right? China's got their people, and who they would like to see in, and that's a level of effort, and there's a ton of noise there, and then you got the Biden people and whoever's helping that one, and that's a lot of noise. So where do you actually get information now, and how do you validate any of that? Like between the buyouts, the journalist, and then the internal kind of disinformation campaigns that are getting pushed to all the platforms, like it is becoming exponentially hard to sift through what is valid even from reputable sources.
And I think Facebook has done some interesting things, and I'm not sure that that's really leveled the playing field or helped, because what Facebook has done to kind of help validate, in some respects, in my observation, they've gone a little too far in that if you share something legitimate, it gets flagged as, well, this could be fake, right? And then other things that you're like, well, that's clearly fake, they're not recognizing. And then there is some stuff like in between those where they do get it right, but I don't think they get it right enough, is my point.
Yeah, and they have different levels that they do that at based on kind of like what the information's around, how it's picked it up, if it's like already had to look at that. But they do have things that are like, if it's, high publicity, high viewership, just kind of a high overall cause and effect, they're doing a pretty good job of like really trying to buckle that down. And again, like it's an enterprise, it's a corporation, they can do whatever the hell they want on their platform. It's kind of their right. So the whole free speech and all of that stuff, and people just have to realize like what this is and what they've signed up for with the terms of service. So, and
along those lines, I heard that some hacking videos on YouTube are and they're moving to OnlyFans because YouTube is.
Sam was telling us about this before the show.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Because a lot of content's being removed, and there's a whole effort to try and like preserve a bunch of that content and like figure out a way to do that, or have an educational line, or get those accounts kind of upticked. Because you have to be at a certain viewership, subscriber level, and or have a legitimate reason that's been validated. Otherwise, all the hacking stuff's just coming down.
It's interesting. I think that's why some of our stuff hasn't gotten pulled down, because it's part of it is in my, and this is just me speculating, I have no insider knowledge because Google does not share how they do any of that scoring or ranking or categorize any of their content, because if they did, people would figure out ways around it. But my guess is once you reach a certain level of subscribers and number of videos that haven't been flagged, you're treated differently than newer channels. Like if you're a new channel on YouTube, like good luck, basically, because they've got no historical data to feed in their ML algorithms to help determine whether the content's good or bad, right? So that's helping our scoring, and I think that's why years ago we had issues, because we just basically hadn't built up enough clout to say that, to basically help our score that we produce legitimate videos. 99% of the time we don't get flagged for copyright, we don't get flagged for any inappropriate content or anything like that, therefore like we're good.
Getting anything done now on YouTube is like, there's so much noise and there's so much being shut down, especially with the campaign stuff coming up. There's a huge effort from we'll say all of the social media platforms. And again, like it's getting really hard for them, because even I think the Forbes article I linked to, doing some research into how these are happening. Like there's legitimate companies being hired to run these, campaigns, these media campaigns, these news outlets. They're legitimate places, and they think they're doing legitimate work, and they're being paid from legitimate shell companies. So how do you tell what is legitimate work from, not legitimate work? If you're being hired, you do your background, you do your due diligence. Like you're dealing with nation state level actors that are, getting better at how they got caught last time. They've already been at this one time, and so I think this is going to be a very interesting.
Tyler, you've got celebrities that are involved in class action lawsuits against YouTube, like Steve Wozniak, because the YouTube didn't take down content fast enough, and so YouTube's like, well, we got to take down content faster now, right? And then that makes it harder for new content, and so basically that means YouTube is basically shitting on their content providers, just. Because
and then they're not going to make everybody happy either, right?
No.
Like you've got that, and then you've got the free speech people saying like, why are you monitoring and like taking the speech and thinking that that's a free speech outlet that they should be allowed to do whatever the hell they want, and that adds a whole nother aspect, and then you get the the conspiracy theories behind it, the lobbying, and there is a lot of that happening. But I think from a general standpoint, most of the social media platforms are really trying to take a middle ground, because they have no other option. Otherwise, it'll end badly for them.
Yeah, I mean,
well, it's about survival. I mean, look, my opinion right now with the net accumulation of surveillance and everything that has happened in the past decade or so is that social media, on balance, is a negative to society. It in fact is damaging everything in its path. and I think it shouldn't exist more, in my opinion. I'm very, very opposed to the way social media is headed.
And Jeff, I agree. And it's one of the reasons why we've changed some of our strategies here at Security Weekly to the point where, guess what? Our primary outlet to post our videos now, to get them out on social media, is we post them to S3. Because the other outlets are just too unpredictable, right? And so guess what? I'll pay for the bandwidth to put it out on S3 because it means it's out there, and the chances that it's going to be taken down are slim to none because we pay our AWS bill. You know, and I'm like, that's what it comes down to. I think it was one of the greatest features we added into our production software was we're going to post it to S3 because you know what? I know it's going to go there. And one thing we've learned about Amazon and AWS is, like, if you pay their bill, they don't care what you put out there, right? Because they're not a social media network. They're a platform that you can put your stuff on. As long as you can pay for it, you're good. But also, I don't agree with that either. I don't think that the content that should be out there on the internet should be based on how much money you can pay for someone to host it. I think the internet should be free and open, and everyone should be able to post content at an even
So you're saying bring back Usenet?
Absolutely. Wow, Usenet still exists, though. I mean,
it's still
it still
exists, and you know, without political, but the net neutrality stuff is extremely important.
Yep, I agree.
I'm right there with Paul. I mean, every access to the internet should be to everybody that can gain the access. There, obviously, their minimum subscriber get connectivity. I mean, that's just a fact of life. But anything else, you know, get out of my way, man.
Yeah. You know, just because we can pay our AWS bill, if other people have hacking videos, they shouldn't have to pay to get those out on the internet, right? Like, we should have access to all of the videos, and we should let the users decide.
The information wants to be free.
The information should be free, and the users should decide which they want to consume, right? It shouldn't be based on how much you can pay, and that's really the crux of the issue with net neutrality.
But it's only half the story, because being able to post the data is one half, but access to the data is another half, and we're finding out the limitations of that right now with so many school systems trying to teach remotely, and not everybody has a computer or a device where they can actually get on the internet.
Right. I mean, we got a lot of interesting problems. There's an enormous complexity to what the social companies have to do. They've traveled the world, and what they've done, in effect, in my opinion, is push humans into a more tribalistic society than has ever existed before. Because all politics, all opinion is ultimately local, and you cannot level the playing field that way. In fact, you just end up pissing people off, and I think that's what we're living today, which is, it's really horrendous. It's going to be interesting to see how the big companies on the internet actually ultimately respond, whether they'll be able to grow up, whether they'll be able to truly reflect localism in its appropriate form without encouraging this diverse tribalism, and that's a very, very tough issue.
Agreed. Well, on that note,
let's go watch those movies.
Let's go watch those movies. Everyone has homework. We've got lots of great book and movie.
We got homework
recommendations.
Yep. And I'm gonna go listen to Cuckoo's Egg on the way home from the studio.
Right? It would be. I read that. Jeff, to your point, I actually read a physical book of the Cuckoo's Egg and did not listen to it, and I'm actually kind of excited to be able to go listen to it, because
it's good so far,
and watch it. And so, as Jeff said, there was
watch it.
Yeah, you can watch the movie of it.
My kids.
I should have just dropped it in the Discord, which I will do now.
Yeah.
So Paul, same with your kids. My kids this summer got turned on to audiobooks because we were in the car for a bunch of time, and I said, "Hey, how about we listen to a book?"
Kids love audiobooks. They really do.
Corinne was very much. At 12, she's very much, no, I want to listen to this genre of stuff. It's like fiction with cats and nothing else. And I said, all right, we'll try this book and see if you like it. And she's like, that was not something I would have picked, and it was amazing. I'm like, great, well, let's go listen to this. And she had a summer reading list. And I think they fucked up the summer reading list at the end of the last school year, because the summer reading list was like, read this, read this, read this. And the first one on the list was Trevor Noah, Born a Crime. But when you click on the link, it brought you to Jim Thorpe's book.
Mm-hmm.
But we read Trevor Noah, Not a Crime,
Oh,
Born a Crime. And we listened to that as a family in the car, which, of course, I had forgotten about how much language is in there for our 7-year-old.
Yeah.
So she's heard it all now. And then they said, that was really good, and it really made them think and understand. And then the next book we did, which they both loved and can't wait for the sequel, Ready Player One.
Oh, yeah.
And Ready Player 2 is coming out very soon, also read by Will Wheaton.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yes, also being read by
that's
Will
interesting.
Wheaton.
My 2 younger ones really love the science fiction genre.
Yeah.
My oldest, not so much. He listens to very different. He's more about the nonfiction, sports kind of educational stuff. The 2 younger ones love science, so I had them listening to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Nice.
We listened to the book.
yeah,
We were watching
yeah.
the movie kind of like at the same time, so they could kind of like rock what's going on. And they absolutely love. My gosh, you're gonna love this. And like, oh, they kind of like moaned and groaned, and then once they got in, they're like, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, same
Yeah.
with both of ours. Like, and you know what? No easier way to shut those 2 kids up in the car than to put on an audiobook.
Right.
Silence.
Yeah.
Silence.
I've had my youngest in the car going, guys, shut up. I'm trying to listen to Dad's book, right? I'm like, oh, that's huge win. Huge win.
Yep.
So thank you, everyone, for listening and watching to this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.